Despite her successful completion of the first test, Celaena continues to train her weakened body. Her growing relationship with Chaol stutters to a stop at the swift death of Sven, a competitor who attempts escape from the palace. Though she does her best to find comfort in her budding friendships, Celaena cannot avoid the hurt of the past, finally giving in to the grief she has been staving off for a year. Dorian attempts to get closer to Celaena and is surprised to find a complex woman and not the snarky assassin he assumes she'd be, finding in the process the determination to forego his mother's wishes to marry an eligible woman of court. Too soon, Celaena braves the second test to prove herself the king's champion, but when she is close to victory, she chooses to stave a peer rather than claiming her prize.
Hey there, we're BookTok for BookTok with Jac and Amy, your book besties who take the novels you love seriously.
We embrace and respect modern fantasy, romance, romantasy books written by women. And so it is in our nature to analyze these books as we would any other novel we might have dissected in school.
With our combined 13 years of literary academic training, we use our education to analyze and give voice to reasons you may love or hate today's popular books.
This week, we're discussing chapters 16 through 22 of Sarah J. Maas's debut novel, Throne of Glass. For a complete list of episodes and the chapter breakdowns, be sure to check out our Instagram at the handle BookTok for BookTok.
Before we dive in, let's talk about S.P.I.L.T. Spoilers, perspective and interpretation, language, and themes.
Spoilers. While our discussion is about Throne of Glass, important context from the first 3 novels in the series will be discussed without spoiler warning. That is specifically Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, and Heir of Fire. This is not a read-along for anyone who hasn't read at least these 3 books, and you will be spoiled from here on out, so please take this as your only spoiler warning. For all other spoilers beyond Heir of Fire and other SJM works, we will be keeping those to our Breadcrumbs and Broomsticks areas at the end of the episode.
Perspective and interpretation. What we discuss in this episode are strictly our personal interpretation of the text. We do not speak for Sarah J. Maas and in no way know her intentions for her books or characters. We also know our listeners have their own personal views and opinions, and we encourage you to share your thoughts with us because every perspective and interpretation is worth exploring.
Even though I try to keep my swearing to a minimum for the sake of my mother, explicit language does occur. Amy does not give a fuck, though.
Never. Themes. We also discuss some heavy subjects throughout the podcast that can include themes of sex, violence, abuse, depression, self-harm, and death. While we will do our best to give trigger warnings for the darker themes, we will discuss these topics when they are important to the text. Listener discretion is advised.
As always, we love keeping the conversation going because our listeners are so good at finding things that we've overlooked or missed completely. You can share your interpretations of the text with us by posting on social media, tagging us in stories, sending us DMs, or submitting to the form on our website. We also post more exclusive content and host live streams for our Patreon supporters, so you can find us on patreon.com/BookTok for BookTok. The question that we ask ourselves this week is, what is it about the lead up to this section, or this section specifically, that no longer allows Celaena to run from her past and be forced to face her demons?
Themes we see in this section include vulnerability and performance. We're starting today's episode in chapter 16. Now, we ended last week's episode with Celaena successfully completing the first test, which was archery. Remember that she was bitter that Cain did so well and everyone was praising him. Now, despite all her arrogance up until this point, despite her bitterness, Celaena is faced with a harsh reminder that no matter what her skill level was once before, she still remains weak, whether or not she thinks she's the best of the best. Quote, Celaena gasped for air as she ran beside Chaol in the game park. If he was winded, he didn't show it, other than the gleam of sweat on his face and the dampness of his white shirt. Now, this is just realistic and a really good reminder for the reader at this point. Just because she completed the first test, just because she did a decent job at archery, does not mean she's overcome a year of slavery, does not mean her body is up to snuff. I think that this accomplishes 2 things. SJM is making sure we are constantly reminded of Celaena's current physical ability relative to Chaol's so that we are conscious of the moment it changes because of all her training. Also, I think it's so that we, like Celaena, learn to have respect for Chaol on some level, regardless of his bad attitude or how we perceive him.
It's almost like when you not go to the gym for a couple weeks and then suddenly
Mm,
it's as if you haven't been
in
in
a year.
years,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate because I haven't been to the gym in months. So,
Yeah, it's no fun getting
no.
back into it.
Mm-mm.
Now, Selena, like us, does not like this reminder of how hard it is to get back into shape. Quote, she took a shuddering breath, holding on tightly to the tree as she vomited. She hated the warmth of the tears that leaked from her eyes, but couldn't wipe them away as she heaved again, gagging. I'm a strong believer that Selena is actually crying here, not because of the act of vomiting, but because her pride is hurt, because she is still weak, and because Kale is now audience to her shame. It's not something she goes off on her own and does, and Kale has an inkling of. He is actually witnessing it this time.
Mm.
On some level, I also had a moment where I was like, oh, I think her pride and why this is so aggravating to her is because of her secret lineage. She is Fae. We know this by Heir of Fire. And yet she is being reduced to being human and weaker than humans around her. And that's demonstrated in the act of her vomiting. So no wonder why she's trying to hide it, because deep down she knows she should be better than them. She should be stronger than them, but she's not.
I love that perspective of it, that it's actually her pride that's making her cry. So I want to look at this quote, but slightly different, just a different aspect of it. Quote, she hated the warmth of the tears that leaked from her eyes, but couldn't wipe them away as she heaved again, gagging. Kale stood nearby, just watching. I think that this also really shows that there's still an imbalance between the two. And right now, we're going to really see just how much Kale is still over her, like, physically, because he's taller and she's throwing up, but also because he is the captain. He is ready to fight. And even though she's Faye, even though she's this notorious assassin, he's still stronger than her. However, I really want to hone in on these moments where she is showing him her weakness and he's not saying anything about it. And it displays a level of trust, because we're going to see the two of them really building this level of trust throughout
Mm-hmm.
this episode. Some would say this book.
I think that's a great point, especially in this scene juxtaposed to the rest of this episode.
Mm-hmm.
There is a level of trust here that gets challenged.
Which makes sense why her feelings will be hurt later.
Mm-hmm.
This episode, we're going to see Selena start to accept the truth around her and with herself and her surroundings. It's almost as if we made it the question of the episode. Quote, it had still been 3 days since the first test, 10 since her arrival at Rifthold, and she was still horribly out of shape. Before she was really peacocking, hyping herself up, and now this reality is slowly and quickly, I mean, I'm saying slowly and quickly, that doesn't work, is starting to quickly dawn on her. She's accepting this about herself, and we're going to get a lot more moments of honesty from here on out.
Honestly, it's so relatable. Like, after 10 days of working out, yeah, I want to have a flat stomach and abs. Like, honestly, I from a writing perspective, it feels longer than 10 days
Yeah.
since the arrival to Rifthold. So, whatever, I'm grateful for the marker that SJM is giving us
Agreed.
to give us some context, because I would have been like, it's been a month.
I know. I love it when they do remind me how many days have passed.
Mm-hmm.
So then I can be outraged. Only this many days have passed?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, we hear from a lot of our listeners that many dislike Kale, and I want to acknowledge why that might be the case. Once Selena is done vomiting, quote, done, Kale asked. She lifted her head to give him a withering glare, but everything spun, dragging her down with it, and she retched again. I told you not to eat before we left. Now, on one hand, we know where Selena's at. She is desperate to regain her former strength, which means she's made the poor choice to eat before she runs. Because remember, food is power. Because she chooses to eat, it ultimately has the opposite effect. Instead of making her stronger, the food is highlighting her weakness by making her retch in front of Kale, who should be her enemy. Ultimately, Kale is not wrong. His approach is douchey and questionable, But I'm inclined to believe he's actually mocking Selena for her weakness because he has figured her out. He knows when he mocks her, when he rankles her pride, it motivates her to push herself harder. He's using that kind of reverse psychology on Selena to make her better.
And they're just so similar to each other because I would see Selena doing this to him right back. And I want to kind of expand that quote that you referenced. Quote, I told you not to eat before we left. Are you done being smug? Are you done vomiting your guts up? For the time being, she snapped. Perhaps I won't be so courteous next time and I'll just vomit all over you instead. If you can catch me, he said with a half smile. So, I mean, you have the I told you so, but then you also have this humor between the two. It like they are getting very comfortable. He's able to really tease her. And that was one that made me laugh. You know, I was like, that's funny. And I feel like Selena with him does get to these points of, all right, that was funny. You know, like I can't be mad. That was a good one.
They match each other blow for blow. And that's also part of the respect that's developing between the two of them. It's not just about fighting prowess. It's also about, can you match my energy? And they do match each other's energy.
I am a sucker. Match my energy and I will either be your friend forever or sleep with you. We have two options. There's no third. Date you. I mean, date you.
It's in this act of throwing up and sweating that Kale sees the scars on Selena's back for the first time through her wet shirt. Kale asks, quote, what did you do to deserve it? And the crowd screams, fuck the patriarchy.
I was screaming, fuck the patriarchy. Wait, keychain on the ground. I'll Taylor Swift. I'm better than this. I can reference All Too Well another time. I'm just caught up right now. And you were tossing me the car keys. Fuck the patriarchy. Keychain on the ground. All right, you can continue.
Okay, I'm glad you had your moment. Selena, quote, laughed sharply. No one deserves to be whipped like an animal. He opened his mouth, but she cut him off. I arrived in Endovier, and they dragged me into the center of the camp and tied me between the whipping posts. 21 lashes. Now, I'm looking at this through the Marxist lens, so I'm really caught on the animal reference here. Kale, I genuinely think he's just really naive to the world and how things work outside of his moral compass, because he is so black and white, he cannot fathom that people have different morals than he does. And because of that, he assumes that when someone is punished, it is with just cause. So if Selena has scars from being whipped, she must have deserved it. What he doesn't understand, and I think we have to give him grace for, is the fact that individuals, including guards, and probably guards that report to him, will use power and punishment as a way of exerting their domination and demonstrating, you know, their superiority, as was the case for Selena. She's Aderlin's greatest assassin, and now she's in prison. Of course the guards are going to beat her. It's a power trip for them. Therefore, they're going to put her down like an animal because that makes them feel, you know, superior, puts her in her place, and hopefully beats the spirit out of her.
I want to just make a little note about this quote because I feel like her having, I like her having the sense of compassion, right? That there is no reason to not treat people like a human being. And that, you know, you need a reminder that people are people and they're not animals. However, she's going to very quickly go opposite of what she just said. And I want you to know, I agree with all of this, but I can't not point it out. And before we get into this next section, quick trigger warning about sexual assault. Selena then starts to tell the story about her first night in Endovier and after she was whipped. The next morning, a woman showed her some kindness. Quote, a young woman slipped me a tin of salve while we were waiting in line for breakfast. I never got to thank her. Later that day, 4 overseers raped and killed her. I want to even just note that, like, it's not even like Selena said that they caught her helping Selena and therefore raped and killed her. That wasn't made known. It was that just happened. And I think that's another important distinction because it's really showing just how much violence there is against women here in this world, and that it might even be beyond being punished for kindness. It's just the norm there. Then Selena keeps talking about what happened at Endovier. Quote, "The day I snapped, I stopped by their section of the mines to repay them for what they did to her. Something frozen rushed through her veins. They died too quickly." Yes, those men should have died. 100% they should have died. You're not getting any complaints from me. However, we just got her saying that no person deserves to be whipped. And then she talks about wanting and doing and actually have done kill these men. I'm going to keep going on that, but I just want to like have a quick beat and notice that. And just note that the rules for Selena are different. And maybe you can say the rules for harming women are different, which I agree, like you hurt women, you should be put to death.
I mean, what she did was, as you like to call it, a reverse Uno on them,
Yeah.
right? They treated her like an animal, so she treated them like pigs and did what?
Put a rubber band around their balls and castrate them?
No. She murdered them. She slaughtered them.
Yeah. Now into this next quote. "But you were a woman in Endovier," Kale said, his voice rough and quiet. "No one ever," he trailed off, unable to form the word. She gave him a slow, bitter smile. "They were afraid of me to begin with. And after the day I almost touched the wall, none of them dared to come close to me. But if one guard tried to get too friendly, well, he'd become the example that reminded the others I could easily snap again if I felt like it." So Kale's worried about sexual violence against Selena, but he can't even form the words. And I feel like that just shows a level of privilege that men get, that they don't even have to worry about it. I mean, I don't want to act like there's no sexual assault towards men. That is a very real thing, especially within prisons and systems like that. However, there is a privilege where you have men like Kale who lives in this world of morals, and everyone must have the same black and white morals as me. And women are, they get hurt. And now that he's talking to a woman who was at risk and potentially could have been assaulted, now suddenly it's become a lot more real. And it reminds me of, I've met a fair amount of men who have been friends that claim that they never thought that catcalling was real because they never noticed it. And I was just, the number of times where I was like, all right, stand behind me. Stand behind me. Don't walk with me. Let's see what happens. And it's just that kind of thing of like, what? It's real. They don't notice it until it's in their face. And that is 100% a privilege that some men get to live with, unfortunately. Fortunate? I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, and it goes back to that almost naivety, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't notice it until it is directed to someone that they care about. And I think that's also the other point about this conversation is demonstrating that Kale is starting to care about Selena. The fact that he can't even form the words in relation to her being assaulted, it's not just about the assault, it's about the idea of Selena being assaulted.
Agreed. Again, more complaints about like things I've heard from men all over time. It's like when guys are like, of course I support women. I have a mother, I have sisters, I have daughters. And it's like, why do you need to have all of those things to support women? Why can't you just support women?
Yeah.
Stop. Like, end, period, stop. That's it.
Yeah.
So, and that's giving me the same vibes that Kale's doing here. He's like, I know a woman once. I care now. And I'm going to keep pointing out various moments where, there's some complicated Arabin moments throughout this episode and, going forward for all the books probably. Quote, "She didn't need to voice her other suspicions that perhaps somehow Arabin had bribed the guards in Endovier for her safety. It's a really complicated relationship. It's going to be really messy. And I hate that like her danger from men is being solved from men. You know what I mean? Like she's in danger from all these men. And so now you have a man who's coming in and helping her. Now, even though, like she said, she would fight them off and stuff, there's still that added element where you're like, I don't like that.
I love the hints at Arobin because there's definitely plenty, and we don't know how to feel about this guy. He wants her to break her hand, but he also will pay guards to not harm her in prison. So it is a very complex relationship, and I love that we get the little breadcrumbs about it because it prepares us for when we do eventually meet him. At the end of the scene, Selena exclaims, quote, "We each survive in our own way." Selena didn't quite understand the softness in the look he, Kale, gave her as he nodded. She only stared at him for a moment longer before she burst into a run up toward the hill, where the first rays of sunshine began to peek through. I love the use of the sun in this scene, partially because of how it's going to come back and slap us in the face in the next scene. But it is a really interesting moment from my point of view. So let's look at the sun and what it symbolizes here. I think it could be a whole host of things. It could be symbolic of this moment being kind of healing after Selena has been vulnerable and spoken her truth to Cale and has found empathy on his side. The sun rising could be, Selena sprinting towards like Cale being like, here, accept my truth, and finding that empathy and how that empathy is growing within him. It could also be about their budding intimacy, and that's emotional intimacy, not physical intimacy, because shared vulnerability creates intimacy. I like to think about this also in the context of other SJM works, because the sun is often associated with mates and true mates, which now we do know that to not be the case with these two. So why the use of the sun? If that is SJM's kind of pattern. Now, this is her first book, so she hasn't developed that pattern yet, A. B, I think it is also misleading for a number of reasons, one of which we'll get into in the next scene. But I also feel like it is demonstrating to us as readers the realness of the relationship between Selena and Cale versus the artifice that is going to be Selena and Dorian.
Okay. I'm so excited because, like, as you're talking, thoughts happened. It's such a poignant moment, right? Like, she runs into the sun, and it's definitely some over, running into hope, running into the light, running into the positivity. And then you have this later on, we're hinting towards when Sven tries to run away, you get the sun glistening there. However, you have two moments of emotional intimacy in this episode. One where she opens up to Cale and she runs into the light and you have a positive exchange. And then you have another one with Dorian where she's in shadows and darkness and closes the door on him. Now, you could start to say, well, wow, one, you can see which one is the more positive dynamic between the two, which, Cale is the better match for her out of these two men. However, the sun that he might represent her running into ends up with blood on the floor and death, which could represent his future betrayal.
Yeah,
of her.
I mean, I think so. I think it's definitely foreshadowing the events of the next book. It's very cinematic. I can see it as a movie of the two of them talking. The sun is rising, and then she sprints up the hill into the sun, and she's, backlit in silhouette. I think it's very beautiful, and SJM does this constantly in this book, especially. She gives us these really beautiful or real moments just to slap us in the face. And I think this is one of those moments, and I think it's very, very well done.
Yeah.
Now, apropos of the end of that scene, we get to see firsthand what it requires to survive in the world, especially the one Selena's in right now, which is ultimately you will be shot down like an animal if you make a wrong move. So Sven is one of the champions who's competing in this, series of tests with Selena. He attempts to escape and attacks one of the guards in that attempt. Ultimately, he is shot down by the guards around him. Quote, bows groaned as the archers on the mezzanine pulled their strings taut and aimed at the rest of the contestants. Selena kept still, as did Knox, who was standing close beside her. One wrong movement and a spooked guard could kill her. Even Kane didn't breathe too deeply. Talk about a bitch slap in the face. The vulnerability of that moment between Selena and Cale is juxtaposed against the brutality of the scene. Like, they did not hesitate to kill Sven. And we see that brutality best symbolized in the use of sunlight. Quote, the sunlight shone through the doors, illuminating the champion's splattered blood like stained glass. Now, unlike the last scene, the sunlight is revealing the very harsh truth, not only about Selena's circumstances, but also about the relationship she's going to have with Cale ultimately. No matter how much Kale may come to understand her or empathize with her, she is ultimately still a prisoner and will be treated like chattel, just like in Dovier. And I mean, in case you didn't notice, the first thing Selena clocks is Kale running to the guard who's been beaten down and ignoring the body of the dead champion. She sees his lack of empathy in that moment. She doesn't process it, but we process it.
It's funny. I didn't process it. I was just thinking, what do you think you're doing? Of course he's gonna get shot down. You fools. That's
Well, it speaks to her level of comfort, right?
It does. I mean, because she would never expect that from Kale.
Right, exactly.
Because that's, but at the same time, they made it very clear at the beginning, you do any funny business, you're gone. So, that's on her for not paying attention to orientation day.
It was syllabus day. She missed it.
Showed up a little bit late, a little quiet, tired from the night before. Yeah. I mean, and like you said, they're all chattel. They're all victims to the will of men around them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before we continue, I would like to give a trigger warning to the topic of suicide.
Now, what Selena noodles on as this is playing out is that Sven's death is ultimately about choice and about the power of choice. Quote, maybe he'd realized he had no chance of winning and that this kind of death was far better than returning to whatever place he'd come from. Sven had wanted to prove a point, she understood, and understood only because of that day she had come within a fingertip of touching the wall at Endovier. Now, Sven, like all the other contestants, is or was ultimately powerless given the circumstances. He made a choice, and there's power in that choice about how and when he would die in order to have some control over his life. It's probably a much quicker, painless death compared to some of the other things that might happen during one of the tests, the trials, or by whatever's lurking in the castle that's killing champions. Yeah, I'd also rather have an arrow to the throat, I think, because at least I'm dead immediately. Sever my spinal cord. Fine.
It's not like the first test was all that dangerous. I'm just saying. It was real, like...
Yeah, but the fact that...
Throw an arrow.
The fact that you have a champion who's been brutally murdered...
Yeah, that's not great.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it speaks volumes to what kind of sponsor they have.
Also true. Also true. Or where Sven might go back to.
Yeah.
Now, as Selena's thinking about this, I really feel like her reflection humanizes Sven, which is not something she's done consciously for any of the other contestants up until this point. And I think that humanization is only possible because she took the time to explain what happened the day she almost touched the wall and why that day made her snap. And the fact that she can correlate her experience, her thoughts, her feelings from that moment to Sven's death and what he must have been going through makes him more like her. And I think it's really sneaky, smart setup on Sham's part to have been able to tell the story about touching the wall and then using it to relate to someone Selena might not normally have related to.
It was such a good harken back moment. It's a good mirroring moment. And I think it also shows her will to live and saying, I was there once, implying that she's not there now. So I want to keep looking at that moment and at this quote. What had made Sven risk it? And why here, right now? There were still 3 days until the second test. What had made this moment so special? That day she snapped in Endovier, she hadn't been thinking about freedom. No, she'd picked the time and place and started swinging. She never meant to escape. That level that we were talking about is her able to sympathize with, calling it what it is, a suicide attempt. Isn't it like what they call it? I think they, like, for nowadays, it's like suicide by cop. Yeah, so there's a concept of suicide by cop, and that's what this is. And it's basically people who are choosing death and are going to do it in a way that involves others doing it for them, essentially. And that's because, like you were saying earlier, they have to take control. And Selena knows what it's like to not have control. It makes you appreciate how much control she does have right now. Now, granted, it's not like she's out here living her best life necessarily, but she has the control of books to read. She has the control of what to do waking up early in the morning, pushing herself. So like, there are some things, and it's a good moment for her to reflect on where she is and where she was. And, kind of going back to what Amy was saying with the whole spotlight on the blood thing, I think it just a really good moment of saying before sunshine was hope and now it's a spotlight on death. And I'm really curious to see how much sunshine is going to represent Kale. Like how much of it is him representing hope, but then does he also represent death?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's like tingling something in my brain. I actually do think he's been associated with the sun leading up to this from
Mm-hmm.
early on when she describes either his eye color or his appearance, the way he
Mm-hmm.
looks. So might be something for us to pay attention
Keep
to.
flagging, because I think he's very deceptive.
Yeah, yeah, I
We're gonna
agree.
root for him, and then he's gonna hurt us so bad.
Yep, yep. Now, after this spotlight on the blood on the floor, I feel like the scene could have ended, but SJM wants to take it one step further with Selena's thoughts, or Selena wants to think these thoughts overtly. So let's read them. Quote, Aderlin could take their freedom. It could destroy their lives and beat and break and whip them. It could force them into ridiculous contests. But, criminal or not, they were still human. Dying, rather than playing in the king's game, was the only choice left to him. Still staring at his outstretched hand, forever pointing toward an unreachable horizon, Selena said a silent prayer for the dead champion and wished him well. Now, I do get goosebumps from that last sentence every time I read it. But the first two, Aderlin could take their freedom, but, they're human. I don't feel like that was necessary. I felt like we have already reached this understanding as readers. So why put it in there? Selena must need this reminder right now. That's the only way I can explain it. Selena needs to remind herself that she is human, that the other contestants, no matter where they came from, are still human. I also think what SJM is trying to achieve is that we as readers, like Selena, should not judge others without the information, because anyone's circumstances could be the same as Selena's. It also does a really good job in that one last sentence of highlighting Selena's goodness and her capacity for empathy. Because what we've really seen up until this point is how vain Selena is, how selfish she can be, but it seems to mean a lot for her to stop and say a prayer.
I do like this about Selena. I do like this level of empathy. And I understand that because I try to remind myself that level of empathy, when people talk about, is it right to kill prisoners, sentence them, the death sentence? Is that all right? I personally, try very hard to find the empathy, and, there's too many innocent men and women in there, you don't really always know. And so there's a similarity there, right? Of her saying, I must have this empathy. We do not know what's going on. However, she was judge, jury, executioner for those men who did rape and kill the woman who helped her. And it's something that I go back and forth with, because like I said, I try very hard to be like, there's innocent men in the prison system. Is that something that we should be doing as well? But then all of a sudden, when you have something where it's like, oh, hello, serial killer and serial rapist, you're gone. You can die. Suddenly my empathy and my morals go away pretty quickly. It is a beautiful moment, and it is a great moment for her. I think that it's also meant to be a moment of struggling to understand these two things that are hard to grapple with. It's easy for me to grapple with it because I am an American citizen, and I'm voting. It's not like I'm putting laws into effect. What's different for her is that she is a queen, that she will one day have a kingdom to rule. And those are things that she will actually be judge, jury, executioner, and will actually have to make those decisions of, well, when does my empathy end and where does it begin?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really great point. And I think that in the context of seeing how black and white Kale is and seeing how nuanced Selena's world is,
Mm-hmm.
these are all really important learning opportunities for Selena, but also highlight the difficulty of how do you rationalize all these different aspects of the world that you're encountering. You know, she is young, she's not 19. She can't necessarily see at the moment the way that she is, in some ways, replicating what the guards of Endovier have done. And she's not maybe mature enough yet to think through that complexity, but she's encountering it. And I think all of that is eventually going to inform who she is and the choices she makes.
And it's her assumption of what this character Sven was doing. If this was Cain, would she have had that empathy? No, she
Probably
wouldn't.
not.
And what if like Cain was going through the exact same thing that Sven was going through and was peacocking the way Selena was? You know what I mean? Like empathy is nuance. Empathy is so biased. Empathy is not, it's so hard to have general empathy and not just say, you know, pick and choose who you're going to feel sorry for. It works that it's Sven because she knows nothing about him. She doesn't know why he's in prison. It's not the eye eater. It's not the, you know, the man who sexually assaults women. You know, it's not Cain.
I think her ignorance of Sven's background allows her to have that empathy, right? It's selective. I'll tell a quick personal story. You can keep this in. I used to teach in the prison system in Arizona. I volunteered my time during school and after I graduated from college. But the second my aunt was incarcerated and I knew what she was incarcerated for, I couldn't do it anymore. And,
oh, really? I thought you stopped doing it for other reasons.
I mean, I was kicked out of prison. That is also another reason. However, I was never able to go back and I was never able to develop empathy for my aunt because I knew about what she did.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's kind of the complexity that I think we're seeing with Selena right now.
Yeah. And what I like about this, though, and what I like about what SJM has done here, at least for me, I'm not walking away with this is the answer. I'm walking away with there's a lot of weird, complicated nuances. And if there's at least like one person at a time to build empathy for, you know, one person at a time.
Yeah. We are now in chapter 17 and we're in Dorian's point of view. And I have to start by saying this chapter genuinely shocked me because I keep forgetting who Dorian is. Like, I only remember the Dorian of the Kingdom of Ash, the last book in the series. And his journey is so long and complex that I forgot what he starts as. And he's bored and lazy and complacent. And that is clearly conveyed in this chapter.
He sucks. He sucks so much. He's a fuckboy that doesn't deserve a chance. Genuinely. Even his internal monologue doesn't give him a chance for me. Like it's incredible that he goes from this to princeling. You know what I mean? Great journey. But let's get into the quote here. With heavy eyes, Dorian Havillard tried not to slouch as he sat upon his throne. Now you might be like, Jack, that's like not bad, but wait, it's going to get much worse than this. But we're clearly getting a sense that he is not interested in where he is. He is bored. He hates his position, but he also doesn't know how to be anything else than that. And what we're going to see in the next section is just how much he goes back from like, I hate this to like, but I am this and I choose not to try anything else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is a great sentence, partially because it shows how little respect or pride he has in his birthright, for lack of a better word, and who he is in the court. And like, when we see the court through his eyes, I can kind of understand it. But my dude, try harder.
Read the quote and then I'll complain.
Sure. So, as Jack read, Dorian is fighting off sleep as he attends his mother's court. Quote, music and chatter flitted through the air, wooing him to sleep. Almost as if, you know, court is a lullaby. That's so weird. And if that weren't enough, if all the courtiers and the party essentially that's going on in court right now weren't enough, the fact that there's been a murder in the castle doesn't bother him either. Quote, he'd worry about that, the dying champions later, if it became an issue. Which it wouldn't if Cale was looking into it. It had probably just been a drunken brawl.
Dude, his guts were gone.
Yeah.
There was no blood. Okay, continue. But sure, drunken brawl.
Yeah.
Idiot.
Dorian is so disengaged. He is disinterested in life that court and death are of no interest to him. And When I stop to think about this, in my mind, this is exactly what comfort looks like. Dorian comes across as lazy because he's comfortable. He is confident in Chaol, the security, and his circumstances in general as as a prince of this court. And just in this simple description, I feel like SJM has done a great job establishing Dorian's character before she takes it all away from him.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. She does a wonderful job with him. You know, he's so not interested in his responsibilities. He's so, well, first off, he doesn't even see that he has responsibilities. He doesn't even take on responsibilities. And life is as boring as you make it. And this is now a life lesson to the listener, one that I learned in my 20s. There were times where I was definitely bored with life and I just felt so stagnant and still. Now, having a podcast and writing ends up being super busy. But in those times, life is as interesting as you make it. Go volunteer, go be helpful, find a local charity, see what you can do. That is now something that you are working towards. You are helping, you are finding something. How can you contribute to a world if you're so bored with it, right? If you're a prince, it doesn't matter how much of a dickbag father you have, you can still go be useful. Go do some princely shit.
Yeah, I mean, he could have ownership in the safety of the palace and his mother while his father is away. He could be right beside Chaol,
Mm-hmm.
helping protect the place or giving Chaol commands on what to do.
Yeah.
Instead, he's essentially handing that over to Chaol, and Chaol is both captain of the guard and prince in that way.
And then complains about having nothing to do and I'm just like bored and but at the same time there's that level of judginess, right? There's that level of everyone here is just boring and everyone sucks. And it's like, what the fuck are you doing? How are you contributing? You're not interesting.
Yep. Yep. And I think part of that comes from Dorian's general disillusionment of court, because at the end of the day, what we can see from his point of view is that everything is a giant performance, and he knows that. And ultimately, the performance exists to lull him to sleep. So why engage in something willingly if it's just part of the performance at the end of the day? Dorian observes, quote, "The nobility strutted across the floor of the court, gossiping, scheming, seducing. An orchestra played minuets in a corner, and servants slipped through the gathered nobles in a dance of their own as they refilled and cleared plates and cups and silverware." I mean, I get it. If that's all you have to watch every day, boring. Go participate, or
Go
like,
do something. Go
don't
contribute.
be here.
Yeah. I mean, if you know what Selena said earlier was that reading wasn't in fashion. Go make it in fashion.
Yep.
Go strike up a conversation. You're the prince. People are going to do what you do.
Exactly.
Little, I'm going to say it later, but I'm going to say it now. He's such a pick-me.
He really is.
He's just not like other princes, Amy. He's also really harsh on his mom.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, "His mother was still beautiful, though her face was a bit wrinkled and cracked with powder, and her auburn hair had a few silver streaks. Today she was swathed in yards of forest green velvet and floating scarves and shawls of gold, and her crown upheld a sparkling veil that gave Dorian the distinct impression she was wearing a tent upon her head." Why do we have to bring her age into this? Like, it's the fuck. Look, it's harder to do your makeup as you get older around your eyes, and some things just sometimes settles in there. Okay, leave her alone and stop judging women on having crinkles in their eyes. Like, that means she had an interesting life and she laughed a lot, even though she sucks and she's racist. But in this moment, I will defend her. Also, I do want to note that she's not wearing red, which we've kind of just shown that it is a very, villain evil thing. She's wearing terrace green, some might say. So I think that it might be just a little note that she is, potentially not the true evil of this story, even though she's going to show some racist tendencies in a few minutes. She might be a product of abuse of her situation, and, leave her fucking tent over her head alone.
I think that's a great point. And, part of Dorian's view of his mother is we learn he's 19 because of their conversation. And it's such a 19-year-old thing to do. He's projecting evil onto his mother because he doesn't like what she has to say, which is, Dorian, go get married. That doesn't make her evil.
No.
She likes court. He doesn't. That doesn't make her evil.
She is sociable. She likes talking to people. Why is it that we're doing this again? We're dismissing women's interests. She likes to talk to people. She likes to gossip. Okay.
Yeah. Now, part of the reason why Dorian feels the way he feels towards his mother is because he is nothing better than an ornament, or basically a doll that the queen dresses up in clothes of her choosing. Now, if clothing is power, Dorian has none, because his mother picks the clothing, picks the colors, picks the combinations, and she even makes him wear boots that his manly pride can't stand because they're too new, which I love. Now, no wonder why Dorian is disengaged and angry at his mother. He is not meant to do anything but sit there and look pretty. And you know what? What a privileged place that is. I want to sit here and look pretty.
We are sitting here looking pretty, but we have to work and talk too.
Yeah.
It's hard. Use our brain. Dorian is like a child. However, he allows it. He's allowing his mother to pick the clothes for him. He's allowing her to tell him what to do. It's complacency, even with his internal complaints. Quote, the pants, mercifully, were light gray, though his chestnut suede boots looked too new for masculine pride. Masculine pride, bitch, shut up. They're too new. No, they don't look rugged or used or worn at all. Then don't wear them. Or go wear them and use them. I don't know. Do something. Your body. You can go wear what you want.
Also, what do you do that your boots wouldn't look new all the time? You don't do anything.
He doesn't do anything. He just goes, looks at dogs, and then comes back.
Yeah.
It's complaining about something that he is absolutely capable of changing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And what this highlights for me, and the conversation between Dorian and his mother highlights, are these really interesting power dynamics. Now, again, in Dorian's mind, this makes his mother evil, but I want to look at it from the lens of, what is the queen doing that the king isn't doing, that we might expect the king to be doing? In other books that we've read, for example, One Dark Window, or other kind of medieval-esque fantasy stories, it's often the king telling the son, it's time for you to get married. It's time for you to give me an heir, because it's about maintaining power in the family. The king's not doing that. The king's not dressing him, not bringing him to court, not telling him to get married. It's the queen who does it. What that is achieving is it allows the queen power in a place where I'm going to assume she is powerless against a king who secretly has evil in him. She's probably been abused, like you said earlier, and has no power, especially when you look at the fact that her youngest son is, sent away. She has no say in his life, despite her wanting to. So what does she do? She controls Dorian because she can't control anything else. She tells Dorian, quote, there are plenty of young women who might make a good wife, though a princess would be preferred. Now, this is, again, a conversation I would expect the king to have, not the queen. The king is the one who's going to tell his son who to marry so that the royal line stays strong. In some ways, the queen is kind of pushing the envelope on what she can control, but the king's not here, so why not? And just the little cherry on top, the queen calls Dorian Pet. Her pet name for her son is Pet. It's another power move, making Dorian no better than a pet dog.
What is it, like in Pirates of the Caribbean? Captain Jack calls Keira Knightley's character Pet. I know. Remove the Johnny Depp of it. I like it.
Well, before Johnny Depp was problematic, I still liked it.
Oh, yeah. No, like if I can remove him entirely and just have that, then yeah. But it is weird calling your own son Pet.
Mm-hmm.
That is a sense of control. It does show that she has zero control except for this one child.
Yeah.
And, even men here are breeding stock, except not nearly as much as women. So because damn, do we just group women in the most trash way possible here.
I do appreciate that SJM does equally allow men to be viewed for their breeding potential as
Yeah.
much as women in her stories. Maybe not as much,
Not much. Like,
but like,
it is an aspect. They are viewed as breeding stock as well.
yes,
Not nearly as much as women.
fair,
However, it is still
present.
present. Yeah. And the reason why is we'll get into the list, but the queen brings up Nehemia and she says, quote, "Oh, don't worry. I wouldn't force you to marry her. I'm surprised your father allows for her to still bear the title. The impetuous haughty girl. Do you know she refused to wear the dress I sent her?" There was someone that says there's some racist undertones. There's some, and you might be like, hey, what are the racist undertones? Well, here's one example of many I feel like you can draw from. One of the things that the queen talks about with Nehemia is her haughty attitude. And it makes me think about the trope of, quote, angry black woman. And it is a very damaging, very bad, poor, I was about to use a fancy word, but it's just a shit trope where it's an angry black woman. And it's hard because then you had the other pendulum of that where then you get a lot of like overly, I think they call them like the witchy friend, like very sensitive black girl. And then it ends up being, well, now black women can't be angry or too much. Like you just can't be a human anymore, and you don't get to be annoyed. You don't get to have any of these attitudes, because who's another person who has the exact same attitude, who is also haughty, who doesn't like shit? Selena, who is white and does not get that same dismissal, right? Granted, Selena isn't being viewed as marriage potential here. However, just wanted to reference that. Women in general are put down. Women in general are contained and are forced to not be overly angry, overly, any kind of emotion, right? But just always remember that women of color, even more so, there's that level there too, that they're working towards that stereotype and fighting that stereotype too, which the queen is now playing into.
And I have to say, when you become conscious of the stereotype of the angry black woman, you see it
Everywhere.
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 Everywhere. It is a crutch that media uses that is just plain inappropriate.
Absolutely. And then you can see the pendulum being swung the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And you now get characters that are not multifaceted and are only allowed to experience one emotion.
Like hypaxia.
Damn. Damn, SJM. We have a lot more growth to do.
Baby steps. Now, despite Dorian coming across as useless throughout this entire chapter, we do get to learn a little bit of how he thinks, which I think is worthwhile. Quote, "As far as ambassadors went, Nehemia wasn't exactly the best choice, not when he'd heard rumors of her support of the Eelway rebels and her efforts to shut down the labor camp at Calicula. Dorian couldn't blame her for that, though, not after he'd seen the horror that was Endovier. Now, at this point, readers may be realizing, Dorian might actually have some sort of moral compass. He might not be terrible, since he is capable of thinking somewhat along the lines of Selena, and at least internally, he's calling out bullshit.
Yeah, but he's also so similar to Kale, where it's only real when Selena's involved, a woman that does he even respect her, he wants to sleep with, he kind of finds her funny. It's like, whoa, you guys, this is real things happen. I know someone one time.
I saw your note as I was finishing speaking, and I was like, stab me. Dang it, I was trying to give Dorian the benefit of the doubt.
No, he gets no doubts. He gets no benefits.
Now, like Jac.
When I saw your note, I was shook. I was aghast. I was just sitting there going, okay. No, continue. It's fine. You're also not wrong. Before Dorian... that, I will forget your name next.
Okay. You can start calling me Christy again. Now, like Jac, Dorian cannot remember names of unimportant people at court. Not that Jac has a court.
No, also, I want to clarify, I don't remember names of anyone, not just the unimportant people.
It's true. You have to have made an impression for her to remember your name.
And a couple months after that, really.
Yep. So on one hand, Dorian, not cool. Like, these are your subjects. These are your people. They're the aristocracy of your land. Like, you should know them. On the other hand, it also makes sense that when Dorian feels so disengaged, so separate or other from this world or this court, yeah, he's not going to retain the information because there's no connection there. I think also, on another hand, it also conveys how much random people probably come up to him and try to engage him, and how many different faces he sees on a regular basis. If that's the case, he's not able to make meaningful connections. And yeah, I guess it also makes sense that you can't remember their names. Oh, woeist princeliness.
Oh, you're talking about me again.
No. I was talking about Dorian. Now, like Dorian, though, through his descriptions, we see that the other members of court are ornaments just like himself. They are there to pleasure and distract the queen. We see this when Dorian starts to leave the court. Quote, he peered over the courtiers' jeweled encrusted heads as he strode from the jangle and jingle of the court. Just made me think of like Christmas ornaments on a tree. I don't know why.
Yeah. It made me think of that TikTok. My money don't jingle jingle, it folds. Also, it shows like he's just so tall. He peers over the heads of everyone. He's like just super tall
He's
and
so
cute.
tall. Or everyone else is short. Whatever.
Probably wearing lifts in those little fancy boots of his.
He's probably got heels on, to be honest. Ultimately, Dorian doesn't take this place seriously, and neither should we.
No. So again, at this point, you guys might be like, hey, you're going really hard at Dorian. Allow us to pull out receipts. We get this moment on how he views women. Quote, what about Elise? The queen said, indicating a blonde woman clad in lavender. She's very beautiful and can be quite playful. As I've already learned. Elise bores me, he said. Now, the as I've already learned is a mental thing, which is why I try to do it lower. But like, he slept with Elise, or at least fooled around. And then the answer to that is not only one, mild, like some slut shaming there of something I've already learned, but then followed up with she's boring, like she bores me. The fuck, my man. Okay, this is the episode where I don't try not to curse, not cursing, but I cannot express the amount of frustration of he devalues her because he's already slept with her, and then now she's boring. So, big asshole here. He has to be entertained by women in order to find them interesting. Let's look at the one woman he finds interesting. Is a freaking assassin. That's the level of entertainment he has to have in order to be somewhat interested. And even then, he doesn't see her for a really long time. So you have the one interesting woman that he has in his circle in forever, and he's still not even entertained enough to go talk to her often. Or at all, except he talks to her this episode. So I know for a fact that there are plenty of interesting women there. It's just to dismiss them all is annoying. So let's go back to the boredom thing, right? Is the fact that he's bored of Elise, that he's bored with the court, and he's just bored with everything. The thing is, I think boredom is just another word for unhappiness. And I use that like in myself when there was a period in my life where I felt bored and I felt like I had nothing to do. And then that's when I realized I was actually like very depressed. Now, you could say I was depressed because I didn't have anything to do. I think that's a fair assessment. However, I think people those are interchangeable sometimes. And I think that's what it is here. Quote, the same ladies still looked at him with pleading eyes. The same serving girls still winked at him. The same councilman still slipped pieces of potential legislation under his door with hopeful notes. And his father would always be preoccupied with conquest and wouldn't stop until every continent bore Aderlin's flag. I want to point out, boredom is a privilege. Being able to say, I am bored and I don't have anything to do and nothing entertains me is a privilege. And I will even flag it myself. The times where I was bored is a freaking privilege. That's because I wasn't working to make ends meet. That's because I wasn't trying to raise a family on my own. Boredom is an absolute privilege, and he revels in his little privilegedness. And then, we were kind of talking about like Celaena, that is the only one he finds interesting. He doesn't even care about Celaena. Quote, It was clear Kane and Selena would ultimately face each other. Until then, well, the other champions weren't worth his time. He dismisses her so quickly. It's oh well, I guess they're gonna face each other. Whatever. The other ones suck. Like you have this contrast between Selena, who prayed for Sven, this human life that was taken, and then you have Dorian, who just does not give a flying fuck about anyone, barely even her.
Yeah, he's not even concerned about whether or not she might be a target for attack.
For hey, that's going to be a lot. Like, yeah, she's probably going to get there at the end, but at what cost? At what training? Not even checking in on her. But again, like Amy said, this is a very good example of how far he starts, like from how far he goes. And like we have to drill into him because he sucks. One, it's the truth. Two, it's character growth and development, which we're going to applaud as we grow and develop.
Yeah. Just the complexity of what he experiences in the next two books. Like we have, this is the baseline. We have to get that baseline to really appreciate where his character is going to go.
And that's for everyone.
Yeah.
Now, I know this is more breadcrumb than anything, but I want to talk about an aspect of this. Quote, he felt as if there were something inside him that didn't fit in with the merriment, with their willing ignorance of the world outside the castle. It went beyond his title. He had enjoyed their company early in his adolescence, but it had become apparent that he'd always be a step away. The worst of it was that he didn't seem to notice he was different or that he felt different. I get it. There's a lot of times that everyone feels like they're outside their own body, that they're separate. And, he's like, they don't even know what's going on. They don't even care. And yet he makes no moves to do it. And it's very much you don't get to complain if you don't do anything. They don't even know what's going on outside. Okay, then change their opinion. Like, then tell them, well, I just feel so on the outside. Then force your way in. You are the prince. You have a say here. Go find a different community. Go build a community. Again, he's such a pick-me. I just feel different. I feel like I'm an outsider looking in. And all of those are valid things that people feel, but not when you're a prince and you have a say in your life.
It all comes down to the idea, again, of comfort. Whether or not he likes it, right? Whether or not he's bored. He is in a privileged position and he's comfortable being privileged.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm going to really dig into a little bit later.
We're going to we have the nail in the coffin. We're just going to keep tightening it. So his mom, again, also sucks. Like, she's part of the system. The system is broken and she's part of it.
Yeah.
And she gives him a list of names. Quote, a list of potential brides. Any one of them would be suitable to take the crown. And all, I've been told, are quite capable of producing heirs. Women are just items to be viewed and dismissed. We are but names in a list that he will later just quickly trash. And even though men are expected to breed, it is nothing compared to women who are a list. That's how Facebook started. That was just rating women and stuff. It's just, it's frustrating. Even though you can have the concept of men breeding, right? They're a stud to be bred. And you're in this concept of, even men are viewed as animals and, have to breed. It will never be the same as women because women have to then carry that child. Men can go and you can look at this as horses and as other animals that are bred and everything into humans. But, one of the things where we were saying that, there's still, at least there's some showing that men here in this world are expected to breed and, view it in a very animalistic way. No matter what, women will always get it a little harder, a little worse, because we got to actually carry that shit.
So Dorian leaves court. And as he's meandering the hallways, SJM slips in just a, little mention of Dorian's favorite dog who is about to have pups. And I freaking love it. Now, I know it's going to do setup for the dog that Selena eventually has. However, let's talk about the dogs as metaphors, because who was just called a pet? Dorian. Quote, he hoped the pups would be pure, but their mother had a tendency to escape from her pen. She was his fastest, but he'd never been able to quell the wildness within her. From my point of view, the dog is like Dorian. Dorian dallies with the servants, with the courtiers, with maybe quote unquote less suitable partners in the eyes of his mother. Now, Dorian is treating the dog the way his mother treats Dorian. Again, remember, his mother just literally called him pet. He doesn't want his dog to be messing around with the mutts.
Mm-hmm.
Just like his mother wants him to marry a courtier or a princess. He can't see the irony of it, that he is just perpetuating the system. But hopefully we as readers do see that.
And then you could even take it another step further, is who does he see immediately after this? Selena. And who is his pet? Selena.
Yep.
Another wild creature that he cannot contain.
Yep. Ugh.
It's a great moment from SJM's part.
It's a really great moment. As Jac alluded to, Dorian stumbles upon Selena training with Nehemia's guards and Nehemia watching from the sidelines. Instantly, Dorian thinks, quote, "Where was Kale or Brula? Why was Aderlin's assassin here with the Princess of Yilway? And with a sword? This could not go on, especially after that champion's attempted escape the other day." Okay, first of all, he gave no shits about any of the champions dying or escaping previously. Also notice Selena and Nehemia don't have names here. They have titles, which makes them less human, less of...
Oh, I missed that. That's a good one.
Thank you.
You.
And I think part of that is because he's just been in court. He is programmed, as probably everyone else is, to think of people in terms of tools, of pawns, of pieces to be used. And so Selena and Nehemia are just their roles. They are not women. They are not people for him to consider. Instead, they are pawns that shouldn't be interacting. Why are they allowed to interact right now? Part of that is because Dorian is programmed like Kale. He assumes the worst about Selena. And that's despite Dorian thinking, she is lovely to look at. He still assumes the worst. Now, unlike Kale, Dorian has spent little to no time with Selena. So what's Kale's excuse? On the other hand, maybe Dorian senses that these two women would be a force of nature if they banded together. They are both outsiders who don't fit the mold. And for someone who just thought of himself as an outsider, I don't see why he doesn't see them as kindred spirits. But again, I don't understand men in general. Now, part of the reason why I think Dorian is struggling here, he doesn't think of Selena or Nehemia as women, as humans. He doesn't see them as kindred spirits, even though they're outsiders and he feels like an outsider. And I think that's because that challenges his zone of privilege, that challenges his comfort. And to do so, to see them as outsiders and therefore kindred spirits, would A, be terrifying to admit to, and B, would have repercussions from both of his parents. And Dorian, as much as he will dally with the other lesser Adelonians, I don't know what their names are, he's not ready to challenge what is comfortable. And that's why he will continue to be against Nehemia and Selena continuing to interact just like Kale, because it challenges what is comfortable.
I love this idea that they are kindred spirits, but at the same time, they are so not, because you have these two women who are making moves, who are aspiring, who are doing things. Granted, Selena is aspiring to live, but still something.
Yeah.
And she'll eventually kind of like, there's always that drive within her, right? She's not complacent. She's not just going to sit here and be bored with, everything that's going on around her. She's going to go find ways to get in trouble. Like, that's just who she is. Now, Nehemia and Selena together are threatening. You have two powerful women, and he has not had a single powerful woman in his life. So now what does one do when you are relating to a type of person, a woman, a powerful woman that you've never encountered before? What does that say? Because now the only other woman who is close to powerful is his mother, who is not powerful, is able to control him, is able to tell him what to do. So what can these two women do to him then?
Yeah, that would be frightening, I'm sure.
Fear me. Selena, though, is not here for Dorian's shit. When Dorian comes over and he's just goes to Selena like, what the hell are you doing? What is this? Like, such an overreaction. Let the women have fun. She says, quote, she insisted on joining. Apparently, a woman can only go so long without a sword between her hands. She bit her lip. I don't recall you being so talkative. Well, perhaps if you'd taken the time to speak with me, you'd have found me to be so. There's the innuendo, where she's like, women need a sword in their hand, and she bites her lip. He doesn't even like it. Like, he doesn't play. He then insults her for being talkative. It's like, for now you're speaking. This isn't what you're supposed to do. You shouldn't be having opinions and talking back to me. If it's not a sexual innuendo on his initiative, on his, like, that he's started, if it's not something that he has started, he doesn't know what to do with it.
Because he's not in control.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that she calls him out. She was like, well, maybe if you had freaking come and talk to me, we would actually talk.
Yeah. And you'd know how talkative I am. So despite their little
tete-a-tete,
great use of that. I have not heard that word in so long. Dorian cannot help himself. He has to acknowledge his attraction to Selena. Quote, his heart quickened when her gaze rose to his face. Yes, sweaty as she was beautiful. I laugh, but the sweatiness, I can guarantee right now is part of the attraction, because this is exactly not the kind of woman Dorian's mother wants him to be with. That's not
the kind of man he is either. He's not a sweaty man.
No, he's not. He wants whatever is furthest away from the list of names that his mother just gave him. Maybe not entirely through his actions yet, but internally he is just like his hound. He is rebellious. Selena just happens to be the first woman who doesn't fit the mold, who fell into his path, and fits that need for rebellion on Dorian's part. Therefore, I ask, is the attraction even genuine? Is Dorian capable of a true connection with Selena when he himself is struggling with who he is, his unhappiness, and his lack of power? Selena is going to be a vehicle for power, not only in the King's Champion way, but in fighting this idea that he needs to be married.
It's almost like you just have people who should be attracted to each other. You know what I mean? I guess we're both hot. I guess you're the perfect woman for me to rebel against my mother. And for Selena, it's like, well, I guess you're the kind of guy that I probably would have been forced to potentially marry if I was still princess and my parents were alive. Like, all of them are things of, well, I guess that's what I should do, type of a relationship.
Yeah, it's very high school. And they are high school age. They are 18 and 19.
Yeah.
It is it looks like what everyone says it looks like, or it feels like this is what would be expected of me. I'll just do it.
So do we like kiss? I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, oh, you're a jock. Oh, you're a cheerleader. Okay, I guess we belong together.
Yeah.
It's the same idea.
Yep. So I do want to call out that we are currently in Dorian's point of view. So I kind of want to wonder, how much can we trust of what Dorian is seeing? Quote, aren't you afraid of me? She glanced at his sword belt. Or are you as deft at handling your sword as Captain Westfall? He stepped closer, tightening his grip. Better, he whispered in her ear. There, she was blushing and blinking. So earlier she tried to use sex, and then now he's using sex. And, like, even now she's like, is that a gun in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me, type of a thing? And he's like, I can handle it better. But again, she's kind of like, there's this whole sex between Kale and versus him. And, there's that underlining concept there. But I have to ask, how much does she want him to know? Now, in the next chapter, one of the very first things we see is Selena being like, damn, I blush so easily with him. I feel like maybe I'm giving Selena too much credit. She is a 19-year-old girl, so, maybe this is me expecting too much from her. I feel like if she wanted to hold the cards closer to her chest, she would. I think her blushing and her indulging him is not just healing from Sam, which we'll get into, but a tactic that she's using over him.
Explain.
I did. That was it. No, I'm kidding. Uh,
Why does
so
she need this tactic to use against him?
I think she's using her, we'll call it quote unquote girlishness, this blushing, this, oh, kind of like a little flustered to make him feel better. She does tell him at one point, perhaps you're just a little bit afraid of me. And I think that's, she's trying to elicit something from him. Like she wants that. And in order to get someone to like to elicit a feeling is to almost like, how would he react if she was giving him absolutely nothing? You know what I mean? Would he even still be engaging with her like this? So I just wonder if she would have been better at holding it closer to her chest because like, look, I'd say like there's a connection and an attraction to Kale, and she's not as overt with Kale as she is with Dorian. She's done a few things, teased him a few times, but this whole biting her lip, saying, can you handle your sword type of thing, I think she's allowing her blush to show with him. So then you have this next quote here where, Selena's kind of teasing Dorian, hey, you should go spar with the princess. That's what she wants. And he says, quote, I will not spar with the princess. Would you rather spar with me? Perhaps if we had private lessons in your chamber, he said smoothly. Tonight. I'll be waiting. She curled her hair around a finger. I want to do it to my own hair. Like, maybe tonight. It's just so, that's what I mean by she's using her girlishness, her flirtiness, because I think she is flustered and flirting, but she's letting him see that and is really putting it out there for him. Because I think she's also trying to match his sexy chicken, because that's what this is this is a game of sexy chicken, and we've discussed this. SJM likes to do this where they play sexy chicken, and it's like who's gonna cave first, and no one has enough vision here. She has the opportunity of Kale and Dorian, and no one is willing to play sexy chicken. I would win. Actually, I would cave. I would have run away. So I am such a big talk.
You talk a big game.
I talk such a big game. One time, all right, side note. One time I went to a hockey game and we were, my friend and I were watching players like, play, warm up and stuff. And there was one player who was single and he made eye contact. It was, I am looking at you and I am holding eye contact with you. I caved so fast. I looked away. I had nothing. I was like, nope, I don't want this. And yet I would love this. I would love to talk to you. I would love to go on a date. However, I am all talk. I am incapable.
It was a lost opportunity.
It was such a lost opportunity. And then every time I went back, eye contact? Do you want to look at me? Do you remember me? Eye contact? Nope.
So I love everything you're talking about. I never really thought about it as maybe Selena trying to get a one-up on Dorian or like use her girlishness against him. But I do see how right now they are both vying for power. Mm-hmm. Selena doesn't have power over Kale. Dorian does not have power over his mother. And so the flirting game is them both trying to win against each other. Who is going to dominate the other, because both of them are powerless right now. On the other hand, something I'm going to talk about later as we get further into the episode, I also think Selena's really lonely. Yeah. I also think Selena, while she has grown comfortable, right, and Sven's death has kind of jostled her, I do think she's getting to a point where she's like, I might be able to actually have friends again. Whether or not she's capable of fully trusting them again or trusting them at all, she's been alone for a really long time. She's lost a lot of people in her life, which, again, we'll get into. Kale, Nehemia, Dorian, there's a reason why these people become Selena's friends, because she doesn't have any, and they're the first opportunity for her to build friendships.
Yeah, maybe don't play sexy chicken with people you want to be friends with.
Just saying.
We start chapter 18, and we're now answering the question of how into it is she, into it being flirting with Dorian. And the answer is she is flustered with him. She is attracted to him. Quote, it made her uneasy how he'd made her blush. In fact, he was so attractive that she had difficulty not thinking about how attractive he was. And again, wondering why he wasn't married. She sort of wanted to kiss him. It's that line of she sort of wanted to kiss him that makes me think that she is not as flustered by him. It's just kind of like, I think as you get older, you don't have crushes as much. And mainly because you don't meet enough people. It's not like you have a class that you get to just kind of see someone and have a little crush on them and stuff. And half the fun of a crush is the hype of it. She sort of wanted to kiss him. Kind of is a maybe we will, maybe we won't. We'll see. And it's not like 1 foot forward specifically. It's not like saying, yes, I definitively find him attractive. I want to act upon this attraction. It's kind of like, well, he's hot. Yeah, I'll test it. I'll test it. Why not? Also, I mean, of course, like this is someone who keeps trying to use sex over her. So it's like already he's horny and she's lonely. So, what a perfect attraction. What a perfect pair. So, what though is the difference between the physical attraction between her and Dorian versus the physical attraction between her and Kale? Because, there is a love triangle happening here. And for every overt thing she's saying about Dorian, she's also not saying something about Kale.
Okay, interesting. Interesting. So when I saw your question, my immediate thoughts were attraction to Dorian, as we've seen, is purely physical, but also, as we've already talked about, also about power. Either power over each other or the power the other person has to be a means of escape from their circumstances, right? Dorian is the key to Celaena's freedom. Celaena is the key for Dorian to reject his parents' expectations. So there's power in that, and that's attractive to both of them. On the flip side, attraction to Kale, Celaena's not even capable of really articulating that at the moment, even though she feels it. It's mostly because of that mutual respect. She spent a lot more time with Kale than she has with Dorian. And I also think that is why Kale's future actions and some actions that he's going to have just in this episode put that respect in jeopardy and ultimately will shatter it in the future.
Yep. Kale then shows up and he's pissy when he sees Dorian and Nehemia training. So he then fights with Celaena and she says she needs to be there. She needs to train. And she says, quote, "You think I want to go back to Endovir?" She hissed. "You think I'm not aware of the fact that if I flee, I'll be hunted down for the rest of my life? Do you think I don't know why I vomit when you and I run in the morning? My body is a wreck. I need to spend these extra hours, and you shouldn't punish me for it." I'm loving the self-reflection. I'm loving the honesty. This confession almost feels like a confession and a breaking point where she can no longer hold the truth in, so much so it comes out in a aggressive whisper yelling match.
I think that's a great point. It is a point kind of no return for her, not only in seeing her reality, but in challenging Kale to tell her she's wrong. And I think it's important that she starts with, "You think I'm not aware of the fact that if I flee, I'll be hunted down for the rest of my life." She's thinking of Sven right there. That is what she is first and foremost thinking about. So I want to dig into the underlying emotions that both Kale and Celaena have in the scene, because I think we have to understand that to get at the real cause of this fight that they're having. On some level, it's about Celaena and Nehemia, right? About them being together, but it's really more than that. Now, first off, on Kale's part, I do think he is genuinely pissed because Celaena, Nehemia, Dorian, none of them are doing what he's told them to do. He's used to being in control. He's used to people listening to his orders, and these three are not capable of it. So when he encounters the three of them together, Kale has to exert control because nothing is under his control. It's not just about these three anymore. It's about the fact that there are champions being murdered in the palace that he is meant to protect. And yet they're dying mysteriously and he cannot find the cause. Kale's authority is being challenged on many, many levels, and his ability to keep his rulers safe, which is his only job, really. I think that is why Kale ultimately lashes out at Celaena with the words, quote, "I'm not going to pretend to know how a criminal mind works." Look, if we look back at the start of chapter 16, Kale had so much empathy for Celaena. However, that has gone out the window. And I think it went out the window the second that Sven assaulted a guard. It is a rude reminder to Kale that Sven is like Selena. They are criminals and they can do damage, right?
Yep.
I think the guard is like in the equivalent to being in an ICU, right? He was like probably has a concussion or something. So that's where I think Kale is coming from in this scene. It's really about he's kind of going into this spiral of ever since Selena's arrival, ever since this contest started, he can't hold on to his power anymore.
And on the flip side, you also have Selena, who I think is really confused of the moment and doesn't actually know what's happening. So she's just kind of lashing out in her own way.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, I actually felt a little guilty. And now I remember why I shouldn't have. I hate sitting around locked in my room, bored out of my senses. I hate all these guards and nonsense. I hate you telling me to hold back when Burlow sings Kane's praises, and I'm just there, boring and unnoticed in the middle. I hate being told what I can't do, and I hate you most of all. So, like the first, I mean, there's a lot of anger. I mean, so many things. Okay, very similar to Dorian when he was having his, like, I'm bored and everything sucks moment, except hers is valid, except for the fact that she hates that Kane gets praises and she doesn't, where it's like, I need you to let this go. Like, I would love to have a version of this where Kane is actually just super innocent and nothing is wrong with him. And he just, it's all in her head. And like, he's not actually heckling her. He just thinks that she's super pretty.
Yeah.
Uh,
You write that fan fiction.
I will. But one of the questions I kind of thought was, why is she guilty at the start? Like, and I know there's that moment of, I actually felt guilty. What, guilty that you're letting the two royals spar? Because I don't see what you could feel guilty about that. These are two people who are over you, who have a say in what they're doing, and you don't get to control what they're doing here. But then I was like, does she feel guilty about flirting with Dorian? Maybe just a little potential. Maybe I'm just starting shit, but
You could be. So I also spent a lot of time thinking about this because we don't really get clarity on this statement. And I want to suggest that Selena's feelings for Kale are really complex. On one hand, I think it's natural for Selena to maybe resent Kale. He is her jailer. He is the person that is there to monitor her, make sure she doesn't step out of line, make sure that she doesn't flee. So he is the metaphorical shackles on her wrists in a lot of way. At the same time, she's also learning to respect him. She's learning to like him. She feels safe to be vulnerable with him. Then let's also think about the fact she's been using him. Up until now, every time she spends time with him, she asks him to help her tour the palace so that she becomes more familiar with it. It's so she can plot escape routes and knows all the weaknesses and knows where the guards are positioned, right? She has been using him also for information and is therefore a tool. So all of this is jumbled up. And then you have the fact that Kale did not care about Sven when Sven was killed and only cared about the guard. And maybe Selena feels guilty for doubting Kale. Maybe she thinks, you know what, Kale's a good guy though. He would treat me like a human. He's shown empathy for me. But Kale's shown he's capable of no empathy as well. What I think this all boils down to is, again, Selena is lonely. She is grasping for intimacy. And for her to admit the things that she says, I don't want to go back to Endovier. I admit that I'm weak. I'm bored. I hate being here. She is being vulnerable in a very overt way because she's used to being vulnerable with Kale and sharing that intimacy. However, at the end of the day, that intimacy has been robbed from her because of Sven's death. Because Kale has not sought her out since then, has not talked to her since then. I think Selena is afraid the person she's grown closest to, which is Kale, could in fact be her enemy. And she might be guilty that she's even considering that. So all of this to say, I also think Selena's lashing out to see if being vulnerable will earn vulnerability from Kale, because it's always been quid pro quo between them.
yeah.
When one is vulnerable, the other gives back vulnerability.
Yeah.
And that's Selena trying to test the waters of like, are we still friends? Are we still
Mhm.
capable of having a friendship when you are also capable of killing someone like me? And in this moment, Kale does not give her that.
So it's chapter 19. We are in Caltain's point of view. It's her first time getting her POV, and I am very happy about this. Quote, she hadn't even had the chance to speak to him, which was especially irksome, given that she'd spent the better part of the morning dressing for court. Her raven black hair was neatly coiled around her head, and her skin glowed golden from the subtle shimmering powders she dusted on her face. Though the bindings on her pink and yellow gown had crushed her ribs, and the pearl diamonds around her neck strangled her, she kept her chin high, poised. So this is Caltaine being sad that she didn't get a chance to see Dorian. We are seeing how not only is like her appearance and her clothes used as armor, it's also used to show just how strangled and tied she is and how there is still no power here. So she is searching for a weapon. Her weapons are her looks. She uses it as armor, as, like I said, her version of a weapon. Even then, her weapons are hurting her. Her necklace is strangling her. Her ribs are being crushed. And the levels of sacrifice that she's doing just so that Dorian can potentially be there and get a glimpse of her. And then that doesn't even happen. I want to give Caltaine more of a chance, an understanding. Rather than a chance, let's look at more of an understanding of where she's at. One of which is her hyperfixation on Dorian. Now, on one hand, we look at this and she says, yeah, does she want to be queen? Does she want to be with the hot prince? Yeah, maybe. But what about the fact that she is in an engagement? She's engaged to the Duke, and the only person that could get her out of that engagement would be the prince. So not only is it because he's the prince and he's hot and everything, but that is her last resort. Otherwise, she is stuck with this disgusting predator of a man. So I just wanted to side note that.
Is she engaged or is she just promised him sex?
Her father promised herself to him.
Okay.
And even the queen says, like, oh, it's such a shame that she's with Duke Parrington because she'd be so lovely, right? Caltaine is a woman with very, very little power. And what little power she has is fleeting, and it's based off of sex. Quote, as she stepped into his path, him being the Duke, he paused at the sight of her. His eyes gleamed with a hunger that made her want to cringe. He bowed low. Milady? Your Grace, she smiled, forcing all that repulsion down deep, deep, deep. We are now in her point of view, and we are getting a very clear, she does not want the Duke. She is not attracted to the Duke. She is repulsed by him, which is not surprising because we met the Duke early on and he was a dick. So why are we surprised of like, oh, well, he wouldn't be a great fiance either. And also the way that it's described, right, is that he is hungry for her. It shows a very predatory action here. And although we see this other times in very sexy ways, where the main male lead is hungry for the female lead, that's not what we're getting here. We're getting someone who is very uncomfortable with this man's attention. Now, that being said, Caltaine is trying to play the game, and to an extent she knows how to play the game. And we should just respect that. I think we shouldn't judge this at all from her.
And I think we need to think about it in the context of a world where there's a lot of violence against women, right? Caltaine is doing what is necessary to survive.
Absolutely. And we get to see just how gross the Duke is. And reminder, he was a jerk early on. So just kind of remembering that as we get more descriptions about him. Quote, she tried not to wince as his hairy, meaty fingers rubbed her pristine skin, and instead delicately inclined her head towards him. He's gross. He's got meaty fingers. I have meaty fingers, so I feel a little offended by that, but whatever. But we're getting this idea that she sees how gross he is, especially when she has her own quote pristine skin. She puts an effort into her looks. She knows what she looks like, and she knows that is not only the best way to attract him, but her biggest flaw. I don't want to say her flaw, but her biggest weakness. So not only are her looks something that she can attract, her looks now put her in danger.
There's also something about it where his hairy, meaty fingers seem very dirty instantly, even though the word dirty was not used.
Yeah.
Whereas her pristine skin is clean and virginal, really.
Yeah. It's so true.
So, despite what the Queen said about Keltane and Duke Parrington to Dorian, we're, as Jac has alluded, seeing the ugly truth of Keltane's association with him. Now, despite her discomfort, despite how much he grosses her out, at the end of the day, he is a tool of power to help her rise above her station. And she is willing to pay the cost. She's willing to pay that fee if it ultimately betters her situation. That is part of the performance of being in this court that Dorian doesn't understand because he is in a place of privilege. That the performance that these courtiers put on, including Keltane, is so that you can survive in this world where there are tiers even amongst the aristocracy, where everyone's just trying to make the best of the situation that's been given to them. And so as readers, hopefully we're feeling empathy for her, because at the end of the day, no one else is going to feel that empathy. And that's really tragic.
I think it also makes sense why a character or a person might build a certain bitterness knowing that no one is empathetic to them. You know, like she doesn't have anyone on her side here. Going back to this idea that she has such little control, she doesn't have much in her arsenal, so she can only use what she has, which is sex, quote, and convincing him to invite her to court, mostly by implying what might await him once she was out of her father's household and without a chaperone, hadn't been that difficult. I don't know if first time readers judge her for this. I'm sure there's some who did, because it might be like, oh, she's just trying to get her way and manipulate guys to get to court. But again, in this moment, think about it, that she was engaged to this nasty ass man, and she's just thinking, I need to find anyone else to get out of here. And the only way I can do that is if I go to court. She has a game plan. So she uses what little things she has, which is, like I said, sex. And even though Celaena hasn't done this exact same thing, but she has done similar things of using sex as a weapon. So, I mean, just chapters before where it's like, come tonight, come see me tonight to Dorian. Not the same thing, but, like she's also using the weapons that she has. We get a little bit more into Keltane's inner thoughts. Quote, no, she was tired of being a minor lady, waiting to be married off to the highest bidder. Tired of petty politics and easily manipulated fools. I think people might get caught up on the first thing where she says being a minor lady, and it's like, oh, she only has ambitions of being more powerful, of being the queen. That's more power. Being a minor lady gives her no power. Getting up in the hierarchy, now she gets more of a say in her own life, which isn't much, as we saw from the queen herself, right? Keltane knows what she's doing with these men, and she considers them to be fools. And who else considers everyone else to be fools? Celaena. They're very similar, and Keltane obviously wants to control her own life. So why are we constantly annoyed at her? And I'm trying to remember the first time reading this versus me now, who has the most like protective instinct of Keltane. Does the reader like her at this point, or is that just Celaena that doesn't like her, but the reader has caught on by now?
I don't think I liked her at this point.
Yeah,
The first time.
that's fair.
I don't think I was capable. I don't, not that I wasn't capable, but I don't think I paused to really consider whether I should have empathy for her.
I think so. I think that was the same way. So, but even with sex being her weapon, her power, it's all so temporary. Quote, though he didn't hide that he wanted her, he hadn't pushed her into bed yet. But with a man like Parrington, who always got what he wanted, she didn't have much time to find a way to avoid owing up to the subtle promise she'd made him earlier that year. Sex is the only form of power that Keltane has, and the only form of power is that she can withhold it. And it is based off of her beauty, her youth, her withholding, and what happens once she has sex with him. What happens when that is now no longer desirable to him and he can go find someone else to have sex with? What happens as she gets older? What happens as she is no longer as beautiful as this delicate little doll? And it's hard because I don't like saying, no longer like youth and beauty go away. Youth obviously, but I don't even like calling it that youth disappears. I think there's like different stages of beauty with every decade that you get into. I don't imagine one disappearing and one coming in, but just, you've leveled up.
I think Keltane has a right to be afraid whether or not she agrees with the idea that her youth is the only thing valuable to
Yeah.
her. Because look at Dorian. Dorian's supposed to be a good guy, and he judges his mother for being older than him.
Yeah.
Now, as a reminder, what did Selena say to Kale earlier in the episode? We all survive in our own way. We are seeing how Caltine survives, and she uses her role as a gossiping woman to her advantage, just like the way she uses her sex to her advantage. She's also using this idea of just being a gossiping little woman to her advantage to glean information from Duke Parrington. Now, we might resent Keltane for that because she's trying to learn more information about Selena. She's trying to figure out how to separate Selena from Dorian. But lying and figuring out who your opponents are is par for the course. That doesn't make Keltane evil in her manipulation. Selena has done the same thing and will do the same thing in her own competition, right? These two women are competing for different things, granted that they are parallel to each other. They are mirrors of each other. And I can guarantee that if Selena were in Keltane's shoes, she would do the same thing that Keltane is doing. So we have to have grace for Keltane. During their conversation, that being between Duke Parrington and Keltane, Duke Parrington gets mad at the insinuation that Dorian might be attracted to or interested in Lady Lillian. Quote, a thrill went through Keltane at his anger. Not anger at her, but at Lillian, at the weapon she just had the good fortune to stumble across. Keltane knows, just like Selena knows, information is a weapon, and it's a necessary weapon in the fight for survival in the royal court. I think what makes this moment really tragic to me, knowing the direction that Keltane's path goes, is the fact that she thinks in this moment she's unearthed a really powerful weapon that will be the key to her survival, but in a lot of ways, it's the key to her destruction. She will ultimately be punished for trying to survive, for trying to make her situation better because she had no power over her own circumstances. I don't discredit SJM for doing it because I love the tragic beauty of Keltane's story, but it also doesn't have to be that way. I have so many mixed feelings about it.
I get into this conversation with our friend all the time of how much should fantasy reflect reality?
Mm-hmm.
And how much of it can we not just have a female character that doesn't get screwed over? And yes to both. Yes, I don't want, women to keep getting screwed over in literature. And also yes to, what if we walk away from this as the reader saying, wow, I judged too harshly? I think that's also needed. So I have no answers to that. Do you know who she reminds me of in another form, another variation? Cordelia from Buffy.
Yes. Very Cordelia. Yep.
What if Cordelia was trapped in a system like this and she had to use her own weapons? And I think people who've watched Buffy, it's that's another character who you judge, who does grow, but you realize she's just trying to stay alive.
Well, I mean, actually, if you watch the first 3 seasons of Buffy and then watch the first season of Angel, it is Keltane's story. You see how the system has set her up for failure.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm so happy I made a Buffy reference. Now, Selena, I just want to know, Selena was not kind to her. So why should she be kind to Selena? And I know Selena's our heroine. This is her book. And because of that, we don't really like Keltane. Because of that, we get defensive for Selena. But I just want to note that she hasn't done anything that at this point overtly manipulative or bad against Selena.
It's a good point.
When Selena has continuously dismissed her in front of other people and humiliated her.
Right. And enjoys the idea of her being in pain. I mean, how's this any different from being with, in high school and the guy you have a crush on? Is he still with his girlfriend? I hope he's not with his girlfriend.
Yeah.
Oh, good. He's not with his girlfriend. Let me swoop in.
And then she realizes that Parrington has an anger issue with Selena. So, how can I use this to my advantage? Great. She doesn't have to use sex now. There's another thing that she gets to use. And it's not even, again, at this point, her being well, if I can just get her to murder him, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. So at this point, we cut away from Keltane's point of view, and then we go to Dorian and Kale. And Kale is berating Dorian for being around Selena, and Dorian's not having it.
Mm-hmm.
And after just seeing him with his mother, and we've seen him with his father, who's awful to him, Kale's supposed to be Dorian's best friend.
Yeah.
And we see Kale telling Dorian what to do.
Yeah. I'm gonna, you have really good points to make coming up, so I'm gonna jump in before you make your good points.
Sure.
And I want to look at the dynamic between the two, like two being Dorian and Kale, because we don't really have much of just the two of them without Selena, honestly. Like, this is one of the first, I can't remember if it's the first time, but one of the few times that we're seeing just the boys be boys, right? And it really shows the difference here. So you have Kale, who, talking about Selena, quote, "She might be pretty and might impress you with her cleverness, but she is still an assassin." Kale knows what's going on. He knows Selena. He knows that she's pretty and she's smart, but he is also very clear and aware of that it should not influence Dorian or anyone. On the other hand, you have Dorian, who thinks, quote, "Why would she kill me? I think she likes being pampered." And he makes assumptions about her own motivations and her own desires, and his assumptions are that she likes being pampered, which is something that he is able to give her. And it's not even like a active, "Hey, I've come and gotten you these flowers that I plucked for you." It's a dismissive sort of action. She gets to be pampered because he tells other people to do so. It has nothing to do with what he's really doing, with what he's actually participating in giving her. And also, there's a certain level of judgment of her gender, of like, well, she's a woman, of course she would want to be pampered. That being said, I too would love to be pampered. So, I'm available.
Dorian, come find me.
But once you've like aged a decade and some, oh God. No.
That just hurt my heart. It
Oh,
wasn't even about me.
That hurt. Okay. It's okay. It's okay. Our demo is still really young and they think we're cool. At least they listen to us. Maybe they make fun. I don't know.
Dorian is being dismissive of Selena and her motivations, as Jac is pointing out. He's also being dismissive of the danger in the palace. Now, Kale ultimately is worrying about Dorian's safety. That is why Kale is telling Dorian what to do or not to do, even though I'm sure that's annoying to Dorian, who is powerless and is now being told by his best friend, "You have no power. Just listen to me." So, to try and gain control of the situation, to try and own something and own some power in this situation, Dorian tells Kale he worries too much. Again, this goes back to this idea of Dorian being comfortable. He's naive. As Kale reminds Dorian, it's his job to worry, which is true. And Dorian shouldn't dismiss Kale because Kale's just doing his job. Later, Dorian asserts that, quote, "I bet it was just a drunken brawl," which is something he's said before.
Yeah.
Internally, he thinks, though, quote, "He had been in plenty of brawls himself and had never known anyone to go about removing someone's innards." A trickle of fear formed in the back of Dorian's mind. Dorian is in denial. He's in denial about the danger in the castle because it is a threat to his comfort. It is a threat to the status quo. It is better for Dorian to be comfortable, naive, and bored than to be in danger and lose control of a situation he already has no power in. What we're seeing here is, in my opinion, he's demonstrating a resistance to change in his circumstances, which by the end of this episode, he's going to flip the switch on. Yeah. And we'll get to the reasons why that happens.
Before we go into the next chapter, I didn't write this down, but I just want to note that at one point he teases Kale for having a crush on Selena. And then he goes and he hits on her shamelessly. And even though Kale's like, "No, I don't," he knows that that is your best friend. You know when your best friend is kind of into someone. And to then go and then hit on her, he knows. So it's
about power.
It's about power.
He has no power. So he's going to scrape any scraps he can get, even if it means hurting his best friend.
Yeah. Yeah. So now we're starting chapter 20 and we're back with Selena. And this is after she's gotten into her fight with Kale and she's kind of in a mental spiral here. which is something that, Dorian would never. Like she wouldn't be in a mental spiral with Dorian like she is with Kale. Quote, he had more important things to do than guard the world's most famous criminal, did he? She didn't enjoy being cruel, but hadn't he deserved it? Here's a good moment of her disassociating with herself again. So, this is where all of a sudden she is the world's greatest assassin. She is so wonderful. And that's because she's trying to hype herself up, right? She's trying to say, well, why doesn't he pay attention to me? I'm dangerous. Aren't I so scary? Please come look at me. Like, all she wants to do is say, like, well, why wouldn't he be with me? Why am I not worthy of his time? She's got a nice little spiral there.
Part of Celaena's spiral is fueled by regret. She is having second thoughts about her little tantrum that she had in front of Kale. And I say that not to be patronizing to Celaena, even though it definitely came across as patronizing to Celaena. But, she verbally vomited all over him after, having vomited earlier in the day. It's just funny to me. Anyway, quote, she'd really made a fool out of herself by mentioning the vomiting, and she'd called him all sorts of nasty things. Did he trust her or hate her? Celaena looked at her hands and realized she had wrung them so badly that her fingers were red. How had she gone from the most feared prisoner in Endovier to this sappy mess? First off, what's the first thing she regrets mentioning? It's the vomiting. This was an unspoken secret between Celaena and Kale. They never acknowledged it. They knew it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And they just moved on. That was her humanness. That was her weakness. And now she's aired it out in front of other people, Dorian, Nehemia. I think that shows on some level Celaena's desperation because she's craving connection, because she's lonely. As I've said before, Celaena lost everyone she thought she was close to before going into Endovier. She just wants friends and people she can trust. It's natural for Celaena to crave Kale's friendship and to worry about having lost it when he's really the only person that she's been emotionally intimate with for a long time. I also want to point out what Jac was saying, how she has to put distance. She has to disassociate from herself. She's giving herself titles. She was the world's greatest assassin. Now she's the most feared prisoner in Endovier. This is how Celaena copes. She copes by thinking of herself in these vain, arrogant ways, because what else does she have if not those titles? And the answer is nothing.
What we're coming back to the question of the episode is this moment of her being real and honest with herself. Now, even though we're saying that she kind of hypes herself up by saying, the world's greatest assassin, yes, there's some disassociation there, but with her question of how had she gone from being the most feared prisoner to Endovier to this sappy mess, that is a very honest question. You have sappy, you have mess. Those are two intense things to kind of put to title yourself as. And I am her, she is me, she is all of us.
I think we need to go back to this idea that Celaena is mentally where she is, partially because of the reality of Sven being killed. And that's really done a number on her. Not only is she sappy and worried about, have I ruined my relationship with Kale, she's also super anxious right now. And that's demonstrated in her preparation for potential violence. Quote, she'd already altered the hinges on all her doors so that they squealed loudly any time they opened. If someone entered her room, she'd know well in advance. She'd managed to embed some stolen sewing needles into a bar of soap for a makeshift miniature pike. It was better than nothing, especially if this murderer had a taste for champion blood. Oh yeah, I forgot. Champion got killed.
Yeah.
Other than Sven. If Celaena loses the friendship of Kale in a place, even though it's comfortable, it's still a prison, in a place where there is a murderer on the loose killing champions, she is easy prey if she doesn't maintain that relationship with Kale and Dorian. Her anxiety is justified at this moment.
Yeah. You make that pike, babe.
Yeah, you do what you need to do to survive. Now, Celaena does try to calm herself down. She tries to step away from the anxiety, but in doing so, approaches the piano in her apartment, something she has definitely avoided until now. Now, As first-time readers, we're not entirely familiar with how important music is to Selena, but we, having read at least the first 3 books, understand music is important. It is significant then that Selena is approaching music. It is symbolizing, in my mind, Selena accessing her truest self. Now, with a non-spoiler Crescent City mention, I want to acknowledge that in House of Earth and Blood, in Sky and Breath, we learned from Bryce and Rune how sensitive Fae ears are and how important music and sound is to them. Selena, we know by the 3rd book, being Fae, I'm going to guess, has the same sort of sensitivity, which is why the music is going to unlock something in her. Quote, carefully as if approaching a sleeping person, Selena walked to the large instrument. In approaching the piano, Selena is daring to access this self sleeping inside her, that princess or young assassin who used to have the luxury of playing and enjoying music, and really the naivety of youth before she was sent to Endovier.
Yeah. It's so funny because, like, the first time, and I've said this several times with other episodes, that I just, when I would read certain parts of her, I'm like, okay, you like music, don't we all? Like, you're not special for liking music. We all like music. However, it is a clue about her lineage. It's a clue about where she comes from. It's potentially a clue about her being Fae, which is her lineage. But, you know, there's a lot more to it. And, you know, of course, as a princess, she would have learned how to play the pianoforte. And even as a side note, quote, Arobin Hamel made her play for him whenever they saw each other. No, it's not Arobin had her learn how to play. Which means she came to him already knowing how to play. So more evidence that this is something from her princess days. And then you have the fact that also that, like, she was forcibly play, like she had to play for him, you know. It was a source of someone else's entertainment rather than her joy. So I'm sure in this moment she's reminiscing on when she'd play for joy versus other men's entertainment.
I think that's a great point. I mean, this is kind of a throwaway sentence, but it says so much, not only about her past, but the fact that Arobin treated her like a toy.
Yeah. We're going to get so much about him soon. So excited. So excited.
We see as Selena starts to play the piano that the notes she plays reflect her deepest feelings. Quote, Sam, like her, had been betrayed, and sometimes the absence of him hit her so hard that she forgot how to breathe. She touched a lower note. It was deep and throbbing, full of sorrow and anger. Now, the piano's not full of sorrow and anger. Selena is. But she's projecting those feelings onto the piano because that's easier than acknowledging them within her. Quote, the notes burst from her fingers, staggering at first, but then more confidently as the emotion in the music took over. It was a mournful piece, but it made her into something clean and new. And then again, this is echoed later with, quote, she forgot about time as she drifted between pieces, voicing the unspeakable, opening old wounds, playing and playing as the sound forgave and saved her. Now, I keep talking about this idea that the beginning of the episode robbed Selena of her vulnerability with Chaol and that intimacy. Granted, Chaol's part of that problem, right? He's withholding it. And so what does Selena do? She has to go inward. She can't find that intimacy from anyone else. So she has to go inward. And by doing so, has to unlock these old hurts, but also in the process, starting to heal. And though she is healing, though she is being vulnerable with herself and doing the things she's avoided for probably at least a year, we then have Dorian, who just walks in and catches her in this vulnerable state.
He's such a dick.
So the narrative switches into Dorian's point of view. And he thinks, quote, he had come here with the intention of embarrassing a snide assassin and had instead found a young woman pouring her secrets into a pianoforte. 2 chapters ago, Dorian thought regularly about how lovely Selena is. But now she's just a snide assassin he wants to embarrass. Why the change of heart? Why this change of point of view from Dorian? Now, what's happened in between? Chaol has admonished Dorian for being close to Selena. How dare you? You shouldn't be doing that. She's dangerous. You need to think about your safety. With that in mind, Dorian is falling back on his preconceived notions of Selena being the Night Assassin. He's falling into the stereotyping that both he and Cale are guilty of. Yet, he's still here. He is still here talking to her, or wants to talk to her, because she called him out. You never come and talk to me. So what does he do? He is, in order to gain control, in order to have power, choosing to be rebellious. He is choosing to challenge his comfort by going to her to talk to her, because that's exactly what no one wants him to do.
You can get a lot when he calls her this, like, just a snarky or snide assassin, right? He's a disassociated herself from Selena. He is not there to talk to Selena. He is there to talk to the snide assassin. The snide assassin who he's been warned to stay away from, the assassin that his mother would absolutely hate. And also he's mad at Cale. I mean, I don't know if he's mad at Cale. He's probably mad at Cale for telling him what to do. And then he's like, oh, well, now I'm going to go hit on the girl you like. You know what I mean? And he's there to embarrass her. What does embarrassing mean? What does that mean? Are you, at first I was like, oh, embarrassing. You're going to go and like talk to her and make fun of her? Or are you going to go and embarrass her and try to sleep with her and then leave her? There's a lot of layers of what embarrassment means.
Yeah, however we want to define embarrassment, ultimately at the end of the day, it's about him having power. Him having power over Selena because he can't have power over anyone else.
I mean, him having power over Selena means having power over her and Cale.
Mm-hmm.
And Cale, you can argue, represents his father as well. Like someone that his father might want as a son, or someone who reports to his father. He's just such a dick, and he finds value in Selena for doing something that he deems important, and that is playing the piano well. So because he thinks that playing the piano well has some type of value, now she's able to get her own identity. It's almost like he's been doing the female gaze with her for a long time, but this is a super heightened female gaze moment where
female or male?
Or sorry, the male gaze. Yeah. This is a hyper male gaze moment where he comes in and she's like, I'm here to talk to the assassin. It's like, ah, shit, you're a human. I didn't mean for that to happen. But she's still only humanized because she's doing something that he respects. Like, what if she was in there playing, I don't know, the flute? Yeah, like no one's gonna come in and be like, wow, she really put her heart and soul into that flute,
Yeah, the flute can be beautiful.
I'm sure, but is that which is arguably a much more sexy instrument than piano.
It's very phallic.
Very phallic. Let's give flutes more attention in books. Like she just comes along, strokes the flute.
Oh, jeez. Well, so, to Jac's point, Dorian is a dick. He senses she's having emotions. He senses she's pouring her secrets into the piano. So therefore, he senses he's intruded on a vulnerable moment. And yet he still chooses to be insensitive. This is showing to me he's both emotionally intelligent and not. He cannot compute the idea that Aderlin's greatest assassin is also Selena, who is also capable of being sad, because that doesn't fit his view of her, the male gaze. Case in point, Dorian says to Selena, quote, I don't think anyone who plays like that can be just a criminal. It seems like you have a soul. Selena responds, quote, of course I have a soul. Everyone has a soul. Dorian is really, really resisting seeing humanity in Selena and in anyone around him, honestly, because he can't even see it in people like Kaltain and people at court. It makes sense that his worldview is that everyone is performing, everyone is in ornaments, if he can't see that or have empathy for anyone around him. That being the case, I have to wonder, when is the last time Dorian really encountered someone else being vulnerable, other than his own vulnerability, right? If everyone in court is putting on a performance in order to survive, no one's being vulnerable, and he has accidentally stumbled on Selena's vulnerability. It is not something she's willfully given to him.
Of course you'd feel uncomfortable with that then. Just be like,
Yeah.
oh, emotions. No, I don't know.
Yeah. Also, on the flip side, if this is the first truly vulnerable woman he's ever encountered, it makes sense he's going to latch onto her even more, right? He craves power. He craves control over his own life. Yes, let me take this vulnerable human. And I'm not trying to make Dorian a villain. We all do it. We all identify people who are vulnerable in one way or another, and we use that to our advantage. If you see someone alone at a convention looking like they're lost and you're there by yourself, are you going to go talk to them and maybe become their friend? I can guarantee yes.
Me? No, I would never.
But I mean, I do that all the time. And this is just my survival instinct. If I'm alone in a setting,
you want to be with someone else who's alone. Yeah.
Exactly.
Girls in a club, like I will always find the other women to partner up with.
Yep. That's how we survive.
Kids these days don't dance in clubs, apparently.
Oh my.
Did you not know that? Yeah, apparently they just, I don't know what they do. I think they just stand there, but I've seen so many videos of clubs now and they don't do anything. Like
wow.
Amy and I used to dance on tables. Like it was it just me who, no, you danced on the table too.
It was like
a counter table.
It was a booth, like the top of the booths.
Where you danced on there too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was both of us. We got money.
Oh, no. I never got money. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, we did.
No.
They threw cash at us.
No. That's just you, babe.
Oh, no. In the club, we're all fam.
So Dorian and Celaena then engage in conversation, and Celaena is really uncomfortable. She's been exposed. She's been invulnerable unwillingly in front of Dorian. And so what does she do? She distances herself from him. At one point, their eyes meet and, quote, she retreated behind the back of the chair. She's being very demure. She's being very skittish. That is not the Celaena Dorian expects. And at one point, he thinks, I'm going to have so much fun. Because she's not comfortable. Like,
she's trying to put space between them. Like, she's just like, I'm having a private moment. I don't feel comfortable with you this close.
Right. She's trying to create a barrier because he caught her crying.
Yeah.
In the middle of trying to heal from Sam's death.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and what was her more recent interaction? Cale flipped on her. He abandoned her when she was trying to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Celaena doesn't want to be hurt again. She's been hurt already.
Cale threw her, like, being an assassin in her face. And that's what Dorian just did too. You know, you have a soul to play. It's like now he just like rubs salt in the wounds. So I want to go back more to that quote with, you know, putting the chair between the two. Quote, their eyes met and she retreated behind the back of the chair. If he didn't know better, he would have thought himself to be the assassin. He likes the power dynamics. Dorian likes her fear. He likes that she's uncomfortable. Remember, he went there to make her embarrassed. That I was about to complain saying I don't understand why people would want to make other people uncomfortable and embarrass them. And then I remember who I am.
I know who you are.
Okay, so I do realize that maybe I haven't made the best choices in life. Even like 2 weeks ago when I was like, oh, are you having a bad day? Yeah. My uncle died. That was a funny day. That was a horrible day, but that was a funny moment.
It was,
I held back sort of. Anyway, so the thing is, Dorian's not like me, but he's still an asshole for liking it.
Yeah, he is. He is.
He wants that power. He wants that control.
Yeah, and again, not because he's a villain, but because he, like
has
Celaena, exactly, like Celaena, like Healtaine, he has no power.
Mm-hmm.
At one point during their conversation, Celaena asks Dorian if Cale gave the order for the guards to kill Sven, because obviously that's been on her mind, even though she hasn't necessarily said it. Dorian explains no, that it was his father that gave an order long before her arrival. Now, we're still in Dorian's point of view. We're not in Celaena's head right now. I think she asks this question because she needs to know if Cale is human. And Dorian's answer rehumanizes Cale. She needed that reassurance because she knows she's still going to have to train with him. She's still going to have to rely on him. And can he be trusted? And I do think that this moment is important for Celaena to continue to have a relationship with Cale and to ultimately forgive him for their spat earlier in the episode. Despite this, though, Selena articulates that she believes Cale hates her, even if it's just because of his position. And I point that out because she says it flippantly, as if, whether or not she believes it, inherently she knows Cale is captain of the guard, and he will always choose being captain of the guard over her.
Mm-hmm.
And how quickly she forgets.
I know. And I want to go into that quote because I think Dorian's response is really interesting. So Selena says, quote, "I think he hates me a bit, but given his position, I'm not surprised. Why would you think he hates you? For some reason, he couldn't bring himself to deny it. He knows the truth. He knows that Cale doesn't hate her. And yet, let's go back to just the chapter before when he was teasing Cale about liking Selena. And so now here he comes, trying to get power and control over this woman, seeing her vulnerable. And now he's like, ooh, but you know what? What if it was my dick instead of Cale's dick instead? What if I hit on her? And so rather than just saying, hey, look, he doesn't hate you. I know he's harsh. He's not being a bro. He's coming in and just being like, I'm not going to answer that. But why do you think he hates you?
It's because he doesn't want Selena to be encouraged, right? He doesn't want Selena to be like, oh, Cale does like me. Maybe I should go
be with him now.
Yeah. I was going to say something more graphic.
Yeah, I know you were going to say suck his dick, huh?
I was going to go jump on his dick, but okay.
Okay, yeah. Dick was involved either way.
Dick was involved. Now, the overall conversation as we're discussing it, the first couple times I've read it, I'm like, this is very hot and cold, very Katy Perry of just like back and forth. You don't know what you're going to get with these two. It's constantly changing. And if you're like me, maybe at the start you thought this is bad writing, this is bad characterization. Like SJM, figure out who these people are and then write the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually want to argue, I think that Dorian is the cause of all the flip-flop back and forth. He can't...
Sorry. I want you to know that the song Hot and Cold is only a few years away from being 20 years old.
Please. No. That hurts my soul.
Because you mentioned Katy Perry, Hot and Cold. And I was like, I don't even know if our listeners would know that song.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
It's like the 80s for them. Oh my God.
I think Move Along by All American Rejects turned 20 this year. As did the first Panic at the Disco album.
Oh no.
20. Yeah.
See, it's like the equivalent of like when we were teens, it would have been like the 80s, right? And hearing, oh no, all right, let's...
The 80s are 20 years ago, not 40.
The 80s? I know, right? No, what are you saying?
No, mentally, the 80s
were 20 years ago, yes.
Yeah.
Mentally, Dorian, 10 years older, is just fine for me. And then I did math, and then I realized, shit, I think I need him 20 years older.
Crap.
Oh no. Although the other day I like someone was talking to me and I kept being like, oh, that sweet little girl over there. And she was like, she's not much older than you or younger than you. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she was like, well, aren't you 25? I'm like, do I hand you money? Do I just start giving you money? Is that what? I know you're not asking for it, but okay.
But I'll pay you anyway.
I'll pay you. Yeah.
Too funny.
Yeah. Continue. I totally derailed this conversation.
Totally okay. So I'm going to blame Dorian for the nature of this conversation and the reason why sometimes they seem to like each other and sometimes Dorian and Selena seem to hate each other. And that's because I think Dorian can't figure out what to think or feel about Selena. I think he's trying to tell himself what Cale's been trying to tell him. Don't trust Selena. She's an assassin. She's a villain. Yada, yada, yada. Dorian, being slightly emotionally intelligent, can sense the loneliness in Selena because he also feels that loneliness himself. Quote, he looked at the fire, trying not to think about where she'd been only weeks before and what that kind of loneliness might have felt like. He's recognizing the privilege that he has had that she has been deprived of. And that's empathy we haven't seen Dorian have for anybody else so far. When Selena tells Dorian she doesn't want to be mistaken as one of his lovers, this is when his empathy goes out the window. And he says, quote, I'm not going to debate morality with an assassin. You kill people for money, you know. Now, these two, they just don't know how to feel about each other. They make bad assumptions about each other because that's a defense mechanism, because that is easier than being vulnerable. And so let's get rid of the empathy. Let's get rid of the vulnerability. Let's just stay where we're comfortable. And that is hating each other.
I think Dorian doesn't know what to feel about Selena. I think Selena is so in her own feels, she doesn't even register him. I think she registers anger.
Yeah.
I think she registers being insulted, but I don't think that the same way that Dorian is like, what? You mean you're a real life woman? Oh my God. I think Selena's just over here trying to keep it together and not absolutely break apart. And then sometimes it's like, oh, you're annoying.
I agree.
So when Selena says, quote, I'm already notorious as an assassin. I don't particularly feel like being notorious for sharing your bed. I love it because she's like, I would rather be notorious for doing my own shit than I would for being with you. Like, her murdering men is much better than her sleeping with one man. That's the kind of notoriety you should strive for. Not you guys, fictional characters. I want to get more into the conversation that Amy was referencing. So this is when Selena says, quote, is it enough for me to say I don't take jewels and trinkets as payment for my affection? Remember, he was being all proud for pampering her in the chapter before. And then Dorian snarls, I'm not going to debate morality with an assassin. You kill people for money, you know. Her eyes became hard and she pointed to the door. You may leave now. You're dismissing me? He didn't know whether to laugh or to yell. She made it clear that she cannot be bought. So therefore, he then has to dehumanize her in a different way. And if you think about what we're about to learn, how Arabin literally bought her everything, and she had to then buy her freedom back, that's going to hit harder too, which again, genius moment where you have this conversation with her and Dorian about being paid for. And then later on, you learn with Kale that she had to buy her own freedom back from Arabin. I love the juxtaposition and why it's like, you know, as James kind of like, well, you know, which one is she going to get with? I wonder who. She then takes control by dismissing him, which is then, you know, he is shocked by that. But I also think it's like, you know, her like being royal as well. You may leave now. If you've never dismissed a man before, I highly recommend it. I've done it to a guy in the middle of a date. I've dismissed him and it was great. So yeah, I think that we are continuing that Dorian is a douche McGee.
He is. And Selena's just really flipped the script on him. He came here for power and she's controlling the situation. She's not falling victim to his antics. Now, granted, I'm going to give Dorian the benefit of the doubt because has he ever had a healthy human relationship? Has he ever seen a healthy human relationship? I'm going to go out on a limb and say Dorian has not.
Has he seen anyone? We keep saying that no one in his life has power. The only person in his life who has power is his father, who is a mass murderer.
Exactly. Now, what we're learning about Arobin, it's hard to argue that Selena knows what a healthy relationship looks like either.
Well, from her parents, she remembers.
True. We're going to assume, right, we know enough after Heir of Fire that her parents were a healthy relationship. But from the age of 8 until now, so over the past 10 years...
A lot more trauma can happen.
Plenty of trauma, not a lot of health, I'm going to say. And ultimately, whether you just think Selena and Dorian misunderstand each other and maybe they could overcome this, I don't think these two were ever going to work. And I think SJM's making that pretty obvious. They don't know how to have a healthy functioning relationship. But I think they do learn from each other. I think they do learn, especially on Dorian's part, how to have a relationship, how to have a friendship that isn't always about power. I love that Selena sees right through Dorian and calls him out essentially for being like other men. He's bored. She's his shiny new toy. She can tell that because it's happened to her before. Arobin treated her like that. So whether or not she's right in her anger, Selena's lashing out against Dorian because he intruded on her vulnerability and comes to shame her. No, not allowed. We're allowed to have boundaries. Build your boundaries.
Absolutely. I'm looking at my note. Dorian is being a dick. I mean, I can't keep saying that.
We've said that a lot.
I know. I have to come up with a different thing. Dorian keeps not being great. And Selena is struggling so much to be honest with herself, though. Quote, "You're being prickly tonight," he said. "You're not nearly as chatty as you were this afternoon. I'm not some odd commodity that you can gawk at. She stepped closer. I'm not some carnival exhibition, and you won't use me as part of some unfulfilled desire for adventure and excitement, which is undoubtedly why you chose me to be your champion. Damn, you tell him. There's like, I mean, she is getting really honest. She has to be honest with herself to be honest with the situation as well. And it's exactly what we've been saying, is that he's hungry for excitement, hungry for something, and he's using her that way. I do want to know though, why is it she is so honest now in this moment? Because there is a lot of vulnerability on her part, and it is more vulnerability, I think, for herself. Like, she's saying a lot of vulnerable things, but I don't think the impact is to Dorian as it is more impactful to herself. So why is it happening now? Because Dorian and Selena were pretty friendly leading up to this. And I think it's because Selena was thinking about Sam and the last time she truly might have felt like herself. It brings back her own knowledge of her own self-worth, of her own value to the forefront. And she's able to then push back at Dorian, like now at this point, she's like, yes, like this is what it was like when I was happy. This is what it's like when things that actually mattered. Cause I think that's another one where when you're remembering death and the pain that you went through, it puts things in perspective and just saying, you know what? You are not worth this. You are not worth my time. And I love these hints of Selena because there is true badassery there. And I feel like the first 3 episodes have just been her being very petulant and spoiled. And we're going to continue to get that. It's not like we're going to get badass Selena. We're not going to get Aelin from here on out, right? This is still Selena, but we're getting these hints of her. And she tells Dorian, quote, I am already at your father's disposal. I won't become his son's jester too. It was his turn to blush. Had he ever been scolded by anyone like this? His parents and tutors, perhaps, but certainly not a young woman. Don't you know who you're talking to? It's very Draco Malfoy. My father will hear about this. Just wait until my father hears about this, Potter. But Selena's making it clear that she will not be owned by a man. Like, she might be temporarily owned by the king, but she will not be owned by Dorian as well. I hate the fact that he just thinks of her as a young woman, because there's a dismissal of it too, right? It's not just woman, it's young woman. So now there's even more devaluing of her, which again, why do we have to bring age into this?
Yeah, because he's barely a year older than her.
It's stupid.
Regardless of how petulant Dorian is, he has been properly scolded. And so he's like, fine, I'll leave. But I'm leaving because I want to leave, not because, anyway, not because you told me to.
Yeah.
But where does he pause? He pauses at the threshold.
And we had some other threshold moments when Selena was entering the city again, when she left the prison. So, we've had some good threshold moments already.
Yeah. But just as a reminder, a threshold is usually something significant. You're passing from one chapter to another. You're passing from one mindset to another. And Selena stops Dorian before he crosses the threshold. Quote, he was almost to the threshold when she spoke, her voice distant. His name was Sam. Selena has been vulnerable with Dorian in this scene, but not because she chose to, but because he intruded. So when Selena offers up the information about Sam, that is the first time Selena is consenting to vulnerability with Dorian. And I think that's significant in the context of the threshold, because I think if Dorian had already made it past the threshold, she would have stopped. She would never have made that confession to him. But Selena is sad. She's grieving. She's trying to heal. So I don't blame her for ultimately giving in to her vulnerability. Not much more is said after Selena's confession, and Dorian goes on his way. He crosses the threshold. Now, that moment to me is significant. What we see after he crosses the threshold, I think, is Dorian choosing to leave his place of comfort. It's him choosing to acknowledge that maybe the way he's looked at the world, maybe the choices he's made thus far are not the choices he wants to make anymore. And to me, that really is encapsulated in this ending scene of the chapter. Quote, he couldn't banish her heart-wrenching music from his mind, even when he burned his mother's list of eligible maidens, even when he read a book long into the night, even when he finally fell asleep. The act of burning the list of names of eligible maidens that his mother gave him is super symbolic, right? I can see it cinematically. It's a rejection of his life at court. It is a rejection of what he is being told to do by his mother and therefore by his father at the same time. Now, new readers, I think I did this too, might be like, oh my God, he's so into her. Burning the papers, proving he's in love with her.
Yep.
No. we know, I think we've made a case that that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dorian is entranced by Celaena and the symbol that she is.
Yeah.
She is a symbol of rejecting his parents. She is a symbol of him rejecting their power over him and his life. And ultimately rejecting, I think, in the end, how Adarlan is ruled, right?
Yeah.
Celaena is going to change the course of Dorian's fate just by being here. And I don't think any of us are surprised. We've seen him mentally diverging from the king. We've seen him rejecting his mother. Celaena just happens to be his first real act of rebellion. It is the second test we are happening upon in chapter 21, where all the competitors have to climb a tower to capture a flag, and they get to choose one item from a random assortment of items to help them.
It reminds me of like the very first episode of Fear Factor. Remember the Fear Factor?
Oh gosh, I
and
haven't
then
seen
like
that
you
in
go
so
back
long.
to the first episode, it was just them propelling out of a window. You're like, that's it?
Really?
Yeah. And then later on, it
wow.
was like, oh, these rats are going to be all over you. Yeah, no, it was just like a little jump out of a window when you're being like propelled down. Same thing where I'm like, you're climbing something? That's exciting. All right, whatever.
Yeah.
But I want to highlight this particular quote. So basically, you know, Celaena, she goes the hard route. Everyone goes this easier route. You know, Nox is knocked off. All these things are happening. Yay. Now this quote. Looking down was always a bad idea, even if Arobynn had forced her to stand on the ledge of his assassin's keep for hours on end to become accustomed to heights. Her training was intense and not healthy.
Yeah, I mean, obviously lots of trauma. I can't blame her for hyping herself up to say she was the greatest assassin. Like, if she had to endure that crap,
I'd be the greatest assassin too.
Yeah.
Or the greatest whiner.
Which Celaena can be as well. Now, Celaena is confident that she could have won. Whether or not she purposely took the harder route because Cain was taking the easier route and she could show off her skills. Fine. She might have even beaten him to the flag. Fine. But then Nox gets pushed off the balcony.
Mm-hmm.
And Celaena does the crazy thing of deciding, you know what? Let me take this rope tied around me and dive for him.
Yeah.
So why does Celaena save Nox? I think that's a question. I mean, it's definitely a cool moment.
Yeah.
But why does she make that choice? And I have a list of potential reasons. And at the end, I'm going to say, I think it's all of the above.
Well, you missed one reason.
Did I?
Yeah. But go ahead. List your reasons.
Okay. Then you're going to put in the one I forgot? Okay. We've been discussing how Celaena is lonely. And Nox has become an acquaintance, quasi-mentor-student, quasi-friend situationship. So maybe that's a reason. Prior to Nox getting pushed off, someone else fell and died, and that really bothered her. She really had to force herself to not look. But now she's in this moment watching Nox fall. That could be a reason. Sven's death and the symbolic nature of it has weighed on Celaena throughout this episode. And she's come to really understand that champions are humans and the death of these humans is pointless. Another reason. Last night, she was mourning Sam's death. She doesn't like pointless death. Or the clincher, Nox makes eye contact with Celaena as he's falling. Like, what a way to get someone's attention.
Look away. I'm a bad person because, as we established, I can't hold eye contact if I find you attractive. Okay, so the same reason, in my mind, the same reason why Celaena helped Nox the first time is right after he admits that he's from Terrasen. That is her responsibility. That is her, he is hers, you know? Like
subject.
He's
her subject.
She is his queen. And that is the only semblance of home she has there. And she must protect him at all costs because that is home and that is her subject.
That is a very good point. I forgot
I know.
the Terrasen connection. You're so proud of yourself.
I am, because you keep forgetting.
I do. We then move into chapter 22. And Selena really struggles with her choice to save Nox in some ways. And she kind of reasons her way out of that, but she still struggles. Quote, she would have won if she'd taken the easy route. She would have gotten there in half the time it took Kane, but Kel told her to stay in the middle anyway, and her path had been far more impressive and demonstrative of her skills. Kane had just had to jump and swing. Amateur scaling. Besides, if she had won, if she'd gone the easy way, she wouldn't have saved Nox. Selena, and I think also us as readers, are learning that there is a cost to every good deed, just like Selena's compliance with Kale's commands costs her pride. I do think this is a relatable moment. Sometimes we make the good choice, even if we don't like that choice. Does that make Selena a bad person? And I think the answer is no. It makes her human.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like she gets to be mad that she could have won and didn't win, especially since she keeps hating Kane. And, you know, her pride is still involved, but at the same time, like, we still are seeing growth. So she's going against her own pride to be a better ruler. Selena does get in her head about saving Nox, though. Quote, foolish. It'd been so foolish to save him. What had she been thinking? Other than not coming in first, second, or third place, why does she think it's so foolish? And it comes back to my reason of him being from Terrason. Why is it that he is a special pick for her? And why is it that it's bad that she shows how much she worries about him and cares for him? And I think it's another layer of, please don't find out who I am. Please don't find out that Terrason matters to me.
That's a good point. I always thought her thinking herself foolish was because it's a show of weakness.
Oh yeah,
she's not as ruthless as the other competitors.
Yeah, I think there's that, but I feel like there's so many times where she's not ruthless.
Mm-hmm.
That I there's a lot to it, but that was one of the ones that I threw in there.
Now, how do we feel about Kale's reaction to Selena's swan dive? Because Dorian ends up congratulating Selena, like, whoa, good job. That was really impressive. Quote, and while the thief had hugged and thanked her again and again, only Kale had frowned when the test was over. Apparently, daring rescues weren't part of a jewel thief's repertoire. Now, this paints Kale out to be the bad guy, as if he didn't really care if Nox died. And yeah, I can see that. But I also think it's more likely that the act complicates his understanding of Selena. Selena did the right thing. She did the heroic thing. And that does not compute when you assume she's just an assassin. I think also, as I said, it shows Selena's weakness because she has a caring heart. And that makes her an easy target. That makes her more of a target for the other competitors, which ultimately makes Kale's job harder.
Do you know what I just put together?
What?
So in many ways, because we keep finding out these confessions about Arobin, and we find them out when we're with Kale. Mm-hmm. Kale is her new Arobin. Because he's guiding her, he's training her, he's building her up. And so she wants to make him proud the way that she never made Arobin proud. And what is it about Arobin? He's like a lost father figure. So now you have a double layer of wanting Kale to satisfy this daddy issue level of her.
That makes book 2 so gross.
I know, but also very psychologically correct in a way.
She has such daddy issues. I think it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So much sense.
Yeah, because he goes to her and tells her, like, you know, this wasn't what we discussed. Like, this isn't what you should be doing. And so she keeps trying to make him proud.
Yeah.
She keeps wanting to be like, no, but it was worth it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like last episode where he's like, you need to be more ladylike after practice. Mm-hmm. And she's like, okay, let me go put on a dress the next day after practice.
Yeah. He's a replacement for Arobin, and Arobin is a replacement for her father.
Yeah. Wow.
All right. Isn't that though?
I'm speechless.
All right. Let's continue. Everything feels gross now.
Yeah.
Now that, like, all my notes, I'm going to be thinking about that going forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Kale's staying true to the course. And although he's frustrated for Selena, she's still, oh my God, this is still so gross. Because now my note here is that, you know, he's steadfast, he's consistent, he doesn't change. She knows what she's going to get with him. Very father-like.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and I'm just putting it together that he betrays her like Arobin betrays her.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, of course, now she needs to tell replacement daddy about replacement daddy. So she tells Kale about Arobin, quote, Arobin told me that second place was just a nice title for first loser. And like, you have a lot of issues here, but what about the contradiction where you had one daddy replacement telling her you always get first, and the next daddy replacement, Kale, telling her you need to go mid-level. So now you have two replacement daddies fighting each other. Different lessons that you're getting here. But here is the bigger issue with Arobin. And this is talking about how he spent money on Celaena's training. Quote, no price was too high for him, or me, she added, fingering the fine thread of her bathrobe. He didn't bother to tell me until I was 14 that I was expected to pay him back for all of it. There shows that there's like an actual figure for a value of someone, right? And that her value is what he put into her, and she is expected to pay that back. And like, her own value kind of feels like another theme you can almost see in these chapters and stuff. Again, it's almost like healing for her to tell Kale this stuff, because Kale, who is a replacement for Arobin, is telling her that's not okay and stuff. So of course she wants to open up more to him about Arobin. When he kind of like pushes back, like, that's not cool. And she says, quote, courtesans go through the same experience. They're taken in at a young age and are bound to their brothels until they can earn back every coin that went into their training, upkeep, and wardrobe. She's comparing herself not just to a sex worker, but to a sex worker who didn't have a choice, who was brought up into a situation and is then forced to pay back into a system that failed them from the get-go. And then Celaena tells Kale one of the biggest kickers here, talking about how she paid back Arobin, quote, and he then went out and spent all of it, over 500,000 gold coins gone in 3 hours. And that is Arobin making a point of her, of saying, like, this is how little you're worth. You spent all this time trying to pay yourself back. Look at me spend it. I had money all along to do this. I do not care about you. And in many ways, while Kale and Arobin are similar, they're also very different, because that's a very moral thing that Kale would never have done. So this daddy replacement is even better because, not only is he steadfast in teaching you things, but he is also, would never do that because Kale has the black and white morals, right? I think, though, going back to the contrast between Dorian and Kale, I think the interaction is pretty stark when you think about how Celaena was with Dorian versus how she is with Kale. They're bickering at this point, Kale and Celaena, quote, however, a smile began to tug at her lips, and she soon found it reflected on his face. He tossed a piece of bread at her, which she caught in one hand and threw it back at him. He caught it with ease. Idiot, she said, grinning now. Crazed criminal, he returned, grinning too. They're finding comfort and peace with one another. They're getting to that really intimate, emotional place. And, they kind of got into a fight and they kind of made up. Although, notice, no real communication was said about it. So,
yeah,
it feels healing, but it's also like, but nothing was really healed.
Right, exactly. The healing only took place because of some information that Dorian gave Celaena, but it's a Band-Aid slapped over a gaping wound.
Wait, really? What was the information that Dorian gave Celaena? That was the Band-Aid.
That Kale did not command the guards to kill Sven.
Right. I mean, but the other healing part is the fact that they're able to kind of like get back into their banter.
Yeah, and unlike with Dorian, where it's a threat and she can sense the power differential, with Kale, it's more match my energy, companionship.
Yeah. And then I just have so many questions about Cain. Look at her fascination with Cain. Quote, every day she got better at running, going farther and faster, and managed to keep from killing Cain when he taunted her at training. Again, I know he's evil. We know that he turns out to be really bad, but he's done nothing to you at this point. Like, what's taunting?
Exactly. She doesn't define what taunting is. I bet he's just existing and his existence is taunting her.
Guaranteed. Or he just looks over at her. What if he just thinks that she's really pretty and he's just trying to build up courage to ask her out to the Yule Ball?
I really think you need to write this fan fiction.
I do too. Like, he's just like this really sweet, innocent guy that was then eventually used for evil, but like the entire time he's like looking at her, just trying to keep his humanity.
I mean, what if he was brought up in like an all boys school and went to
Mm-hmm.
all boys military training? And,
He's
this is
just
the
really
first.
nervous about her, and he doesn't know, like, the first time he walks in, he goes straight to her because he's just so amazed with her, but doesn't know what to say. I'm gonna write that fan fiction.
I love it. I love it. So this fun resetting of normal interaction with Kale ends with, quote, "It wasn't until later that Philippa brought the news. The champion who hadn't shown up for the test had been found dead in a servant's stairwell, brutally mauled and dismembered." This is an example of what I love most about SJM's writing style. We've already seen it a couple times in this episode, but this is more, I think, overt. That normal is immediately balanced out with tragic. Happiness, goodness is immediately wiped away with the bad. And it's so great because it's so much more impactful. Sad is not more impactful on top of sad. Sad is more impactful on top of happy. This moment was a great moment for SJM to have done that. How we end this chapter and this whole episode is we see the humbling of Selena. We're witness to that journey of, oh, you're not all talk. You are
Mm-hmm.
not as great as you try to convince yourself you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, why now? Which I think we'll get to at the end.
Yeah, and I really want to look into the last line she says in this chapter, and that is, quote, "She'd always been so sure she'd make it, being one of the final champions. But if she were honest with herself, Selena wasn't so sure anymore." And again, that honesty, that brutal honesty, that questioning, that self-doubt, there's a lot of things that are making her face this reality, which we'll get into the question. Does facing her reality and her own honesty show that she's becoming more confident with herself, or just accepting a new layer of trauma? You know what I mean? Like, there's just a lot of reasons why. And she's not trying to play herself up right now. She is facing her own dark reality. So we'll get to that answer after we get through some breadcrumbs and broomsticks.
In chapter 17, when Dorian is in court, he thinks to himself that he feels, quote, as if there were something inside him that didn't fit in with their merriment, with their willing ignorance of the world outside the castle, which is alluding to his secret hidden power.
In chapter 19, Dorian tells Kale, "Then you'll have gray hair before you're 25, and Sardathian certainly won't fall in love with you. If she does try to escape, which she won't, then she'll break your heart, and you'd be forced to throw her in the dungeons, hunt her down, or kill her." Kale said, "Dorian, I don't like her." It hits a little close to home. I feel like, we should look into Dorian being a psychic.
He might be the next Nostradamus.
I know.
And in chapter 20, when Dorian talks to Selena in her room, he tries, quote, not to get lost in her strange, lovely eyes.
Mm-hmm. Why are they strange, Amy?
Because they are the key to her Fae identity.
Ooh. Okay, let's look at some listener thoughts. All right, one of the listener, because we like to kind of see what listeners are up to. So we did ask our listeners, thoughts on these early chapters. And Caesar says, "I actually appreciate Selena's quote unquote vanity. Love that she's kicks ass and enjoys looking pretty."
Love this thought from Caesar Fix, because you know what? Why do we put women down for being vain? Men are vain all the time, and we just let them exist.
I know. Let her be celebratory of her own looks and everything. And also, I think we've learned that there's a lot of more meanings as to when she's really highlighting her own "I'm so wonderfulness."
Right. It's definitely a coping mechanism, but you know what?
Mm-hmm.
We all have to survive in our own way.
Mm-hmm. The next one, Sav Gab Hutch says, "Any signs that Selena is actually Aelin yet?"
We've definitely seen some princessy attitude and action from her.
Absolutely. And then another one, Rosie says, "I love how much Selena loves luxury. Such a contrast to Farah, just wanting paint."
I do appreciate how different SJM tries to make her female main characters. And I think that's why I enjoyed Selena / Aelin so much when I was reading Throne of Glass, because she was a breath of fresh air compared to Farah.
I think there's a lot to be said about her love of luxury, and I think it's a big trauma response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to leave it at that so that over the course of the season, we will answer what that trauma response is to.
Yeah, absolutely. And last but not least, assuming we're done, Steph.Nicole says, while I think who they each end up with is perfect, this original love triangle was so good.
It's true. And we
It's
can't say who
fun.
everyone ends up with. We
Right,
can't
right.
say, where it goes. But we do know by the end of book 3, it has exploded, and it is some great drama.
It's a dumpster fire is what it is.
I don't even remember things at all. Like, I know I should probably read into what happens in the book 2 and 3, but because I don't remember a big majority of it, but I kind of like the excitement and the fun.
Yeah, I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah. All right, I think I have a question for you, Amy.
Yes.
My question to you, as I scroll to look for it, what is it about the lead up to this section, or this section specifically, that no longer allows Celaena to run from her past and be forced to face her demons?
I have so many thoughts about this, but I want to start off with the fact that after a year of slavery and just trying to survive, Celaena finds herself in a situation where vulnerability is becoming normal, where she's deprogramming the way she had to think and act in order to survive prison, in order to survive Endovier. And so the repetition of vulnerability with Chaol, with Dorian, mostly with Chaol, it's unlocking access to herself and the things that she has not resolved, so that when Chaol takes away access to vulnerability, she has to turn inward, and she can't stop the flow of vulnerability and the things that she has to deal with. I think your point about Chaol being a replacement for Arobin has completely blown my mind and is definitely part of it. I'll let you talk about that. I also want to say that Celaena is 18 years old. You want people to know your story at 18 years old. And I think that Celaena, who has not dealt with the past, the true past of before she was 8 years old, and has not dealt with the trauma of the last 10 years or her recent betrayal, has to stop and choose which one she's going to deal with, and she's going to deal with the easier one. She's going to resolve the easier one, which is the most recent past.
Yeah.
Because it is easier to do that than to really grapple with the truth of who she is.
There are so many reasons, like you're saying, that we're at this point where Celaena is being forced to, I don't think she's being forced. I think that she's choosing to kind of step into this level of reality. But I also think there's a level of forcing because, if she wants to continue winning or even surviving this game, she has to be honest with herself. She's not in tip-top shape. She is not one of the best competitors there. So there's a certain level of being forced, right? And then you have this emotional layer that she's starting to understand and uncover. And now that I have this, Chaol equals Arobin thing, if you think about what is one of the biggest things that is missing here, and that is Arobin. Arobin came into her life very quickly after her parents died, right? Like, he found her in the river.
Yes. Sorry, I just had a thought spiral.
Okay.
Yes.
So Arobin came into her life. He's the one who found her in the river. He has then had manipulation, control, and a constant abusive presence in her life from the get-go. That is all she's known. And then you have her in Endovier, who is a prisoner, but even then, Arobin has control over her safety. So she is at the will and mercy of a man until he decides he's no longer interested in spending money to save her. Now here she is, finally removed from that figure. You have a replacement Arobin who we'll say is at least healthier than actual Arobin. I'm not saying Chaol's perfect, but he's not Arobin. And she's able to truly, for the first time, be away from that abusive father figure and start to kind of process and cope. And in order to process and cope, she starts to cope and process maybe even the trauma of losing her parents and kingdom, which she never was able to do when she was under that other man's control.
Yeah.
All right, what's your spiral thought?
So my spiral thought is a slight spoiler for Assassin's Blade. I think. So just fair warning to anyone who hasn't read Assassin's Blade. But I just kind of put it together that if Cale is Arobin, I think
Dorian
on,
is Sam.
on some level,
I agree.
Dorian is Sam. And, you know, if I remember correctly, Selena and Sam didn't necessarily like each other to begin with. He was also an assassin. They didn't get along, and then they develop a close relationship. And in some ways, she's repeating that history with Dorian. They have a lot of similarities. They're both powerless in their royalness, in their nobility, and they do have dark abusive pasts. And so they are connecting against the will of Cale / Arobin. And ultimately, Selena is going to choose not to have that relationship. But there are a lot of parallels. And so for her to basically be reliving her past in the present with these two males makes sense that she's just like, oh, I still have to deal with the past. I still have to grieve the past.
I was thinking of that when we were talking about when I was like, wait a minute, Cale's Arobin, because she opens up to Cale about Arobin and she opens up to Dorian about Sam. So there is an unconscious connection that she's making with each of these men.
Yep.
Doesn't at one point Arobin kind of hint that he would marry Selena? Like he threatens to?
I think so.
Yeah. So even with like substitute daddy, he's like, he's gross.
Think he was still sexually attracted to her.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I think he was even saying like, well, now that you're older, we can get together.
Yeah. Ugh.
No, he's gross. But again, makes sense why Cale would be that one then.
Yeah.
That, you know, that, because you're like, oh, it's even like more traumatizing with like book 2. And it's like, no, it makes sense because Arobin wanted to be with her the whole time too. And then like, of course, Sam is like, you know, I hate to say it, but Sam's kind of a footnote. And so is Dorian and her romantic.
Yeah.
All right. I hope everyone else is just as blown as we are, because that was a fun, work around.
That's the most fun I've had in a couple seasons, is this episode.
You said that last time too.
Did I?
Yeah. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Book Talk for Book Talk with Jac and Amy. Next week, we'll be exploring chapters 23 through 26 of Throne of Glass.
We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platform. We would love to hear your thoughts based on today's conversation. You can submit your comments to our forum at booktalkforbooktalk.com for a chance to have your feedback discussed during a future mini episode or on a Patreon exclusive episode.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please visit our website, booktalkforbooktalk.com, to view our latest merch and learn about supporting the show through Patreon or Venmo. You can follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at the handle Book Talk for Book Talk.
Bye.
Bye. Staving off?
Yeah. Oh, so bad. Did you hear him?
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to stop moving.
As you continue to move.
I can't be trusted. Okay, I'm done.